Welcome back to another class here in Silicon Dojo in Asheville. If you are new to the classes that I am currently doing here on YouTube, basically what this is every week I do a presentation here live at our offices here in Asheville, North Carolina, and then the day after I essentially get in front of the camera and redo the entire presentation. So the way that I think of these particular classes is imagine this as basically the director's cut of the class that I had last night. So the reason that I do this is, as I've said many times before, I feel that putting a camera into a room, not only does something go into the camera, your video and your audio and all of that, but something also comes out from the other side. And I don't want the people that are coming here to my classes to have to worry about whatever demons it is that crawl out of the camera. So anyways, today the class that we're going to be doing is a cybersecurity introduction class. I did this class last night, and I think it went over relatively well. A couple of things, just so you all know, if you're watching this, in the timeline when these videos are coming out, approximately when they are coming out, something for you to know is that I am happy to say we are going to be moving to a different office. So if you are remote, if you are watching these videos from somewhere else in the world, and one of the things that you complain about is, Eli, the echo, the audio quality of these classes is not up to par. I expected better out of free technology classes. Well, hopefully on Monday I'm actually going to be moving to our new office space. I got an office space about twice the size of what we currently have, so that we can actually start doing the in-person hands-on labs like I've been wanting to do. The good part about the office that we're going to is it has carpet. Carpet. It's an amazing thing. I don't know what it is with like the new generations, like the millennials and the Gen Zs and all the folks pretending to be millennials and Gen Zs. They really like cement floors and fake hardwood floors. And to be honest with you, as a professional, I don't understand why. It does. It makes voices echo. It makes everything louder because basically there's no material to suck up the sound. I have to say, I'm just going to put this on the table. I really like carpet. Any place I'm going to be doing Silicon Dojo, anywhere other than areas where there's going to be soldering or any kind of power tools or anything, I do have to say, we are going to have carpet. Carpet's a good thing. I'm just saying. So anyways, the new place that we're going to be going to will have carpet. The important thing for you folks at home is that means then there will not be so much echo. Hopefully the sound quality will be better. Also, we won't be on the beside the main road like we currently are. So hopefully we won't hear fire trucks and all that kind of stuff going into the future. The other thing also, topically, just so you all know at home, really excited about, I think we may be closing our first sponsor. Again, with Silicon Dojo, the concept here is free to the end user technology education. What if I could do what I did on YouTube in the real world? Provide high quality education actually in a physical environment. And it looks like we might actually be getting our first sponsor, which that is a hell of a milestone. But anyways, that's what's going on topically. Most of you people probably don't care about this, and even if you do, you're probably watching this in like 2025 or something, and so this is all so old. So anyways, let's get to the class. So the class you're doing today is a cybersecurity introduction. So cybersecurity is a very important topic in the modern world, and I know this is going to surprise you. It's got to be shocking for anybody that's watched me for any amount of time, but I actually feel the way that cybersecurity is talked about is kind of foolish. Stupid? What's a family-friendly way of saying idiotic? Cybersecurity is talked about a lot in the modern world. The word cybersecurity is thrown around. The problem that I see is I don't think people are really thinking about what cybersecurity actually is properly, and that's what's causing a lot of issues for a lot of folks. I think if you rethink about how you consider cybersecurity and consider how you're going to be dealing with cybersecurity, I think it will solve a lot of problems for you as a professional. Now, one of the things I say, I do these trigger warnings at the beginning of my classes, and one of the warnings that I will give is, nope, still don't care. So I started doing this type of particular trigger warning when I did the hacking class last week, and basically one of the things is whenever you talk about hacking, whenever you talk about cybersecurity, whenever you talk about water anymore, it gets political all of a sudden. Everybody has so many opinions. So many opinions. I'm old enough. I am old enough to remember when people did not have nearly so many opinions. The important thing to understand when I talk about cybersecurity, when I talk about hacking, when I talk about a lot of the things that I'm talking about, is I don't care about the opinions, right? Again, from a director's note, doing these types of classes, one of the issues you get into in the modern world is talking about cybersecurity is difficult. Talking about Python is difficult. Talking about parsing is difficult. And so the thing is, right, if you have one subject area that's difficult, and another subject area, like politics, that's easy. The problem is you start having a class full of people all arguing about the easy thing to argue about, which absolutely sucks, especially when you're doing live classes. So one of the things I've told my people when they come into the class, again and again and again and again, is the only times I care about the color red or the color blue is basically when you're using LEDs in order to create a dashboard and you're trying to figure out what color you should use in order to alert the user. Otherwise, I don't care about this stuff. Again, I'm just not getting into the politics and all of that. So if you have issues, anyways, you can scream at the screen. Hey, I mean, I do have to say that, right? Like my people, when they're here, I have to worry about it because I don't want a stupid little argument session in my classroom. But you're at home. So I guess feel free to scream at your LCD screen all you want. Just realize I don't really care. As I tell my people is feel free at the end of the class to go and grab some hot cocoa and argue about this crap all that you want. I'm gonna go home and drink some bedtime tea and go to bed with my wife. The other warning that I will give you, I think this is an important thing to start talking about in the modern world, again, politics and all that kind of stuff, is just what your bias is. Where are you coming from? One of the reasons that I irritate a lot of viewers and sometimes a lot of students is because my viewpoint is actually very different from a lot of other people's viewpoints. My lived experience is shockingly different than most people's lived experience. So when I come to these types of classes, I come to this with a certain background. With Donald Duck in the Army, again, remember I started in technology in the US Army. I was willing to grab a weapon, I don't know, protect freedom or whatever the hell it was I was supposed to do. So a lot of the times when I talk about security, when I talk about hacking, when I talk about a lot about these things, do remember my first understanding of technology was literally in the US Army, and they beat a lot of, frankly, quite good information into my head. So when I talk about things like cybersecurity and all that, yes, I am siding on the security point of view for a lot of these things. The other things to remember from the bias standpoint, I come at this from an organization leader, a business owner, somebody who has had employees, and I don't know if I should say hopefully we'll have employees again. To say hopefully we'll have employees again is completely incorrect. Hopefully, Silicon Dojo will grow to the point that I will be required to have employees. That's a much better statement. So anyways, when I talk about things like cybersecurity, the fact of the matter is I'm coming at this from the business owner, the manager's point of view. To be clear, there's not a really right or wrong bias in some of these things, but it is important to understand where your instructor is coming from, and so I'm coming from a, well, this sounds really horrible, a militaristic capitalist bent. It sounds a lot better until you put it that way. But anyways, that's just how it goes, so you understand. Now, one of the interesting things that I find whenever we start talking about cybersecurity is the reality is if most companies, if most administrators followed basic cybersecurity practices, we would have very few issues in the modern world. When you see these ransomware attacks, when you see these spear phishing attacks, when you see so many of the attacks that are currently occurring, it's because many administrators are grossly negligent. I was going to put that one out there too. If administrators actually did the job that they were paid for, a lot of these issues would go away. And I think one of the interesting things is literally right before I did this class, I went to the FBI, I went to their whole cybersecurity bulletin board, and they actually have some very good advice for protecting your systems. And here's going to be the shocker. You don't need a master's degree to follow any of this advice. But if people actually follow this advice, we'd have a lot fewer problems. Make sure to keep your firewalls turned on. So especially with your servers and all that type of thing. Here's the thing. People cannot do a brute force SSH attack or a brute force RDP attack if those particular ports are not open on your server. Shocking how that is. Install, or update your antivirus. I've seen this in the real world, especially even with businesses or larger organizations, where they buy antivirus software. They have a consultant that buys antivirus software for them. Obviously, you get the antivirus software, plus you get 1, 2, 3 years of updates, either for free or you pay for it when you initially buy it. You don't know how many businesses and organizations that I walked into where they had antivirus installed. It just hadn't been updated in 2 years, right? Just make sure all the antivirus and everything is actually installed and updated. Install or update your anti-spyware technology. Sadly, anti-spyware and antivirus software is many times different things. Even though that's stupid on its own, the reality is it's still good advice. Keep your operating system up to date. Here's one of the things, right? Look, we can complain about Microsoft for so many reasons. Microsoft does so much stupid crap. We could sit here with a couple of kegs of beer and we could complain about Microsoft, and even after the kegs of beer were all drunk, we could still keep complaining about Microsoft. Microsoft does a lot of stupid stuff. The reality, though, is they're not actually necessarily as bad as we want to make them out to be. A lot of times, problems with Microsoft operating systems, Microsoft has found out about those problems. Microsoft has created patches for those problems, but people simply have not installed the patches for the problems on their computers. Again, if you get hit by what's called a zero-day attack, a zero-day attack is an attack that nobody knew existed until it was let loose in the wild, right? You get hit with a zero-day attack, again, I can go scream at Microsoft about that one. But a lot of things, viruses, worms, all that kind of stuff. Many times, Microsoft knew that there was a problem. They fixed the problem. They put the patch out for the problem a year ago. And the administrator didn't bother around to actually install the patch onto the server. Server gets compromised, everything goes to hell. So make sure to just update your operating systems. Be careful of what you download. Again, especially with like employees, an important thing to be thinking about. Let's say you have somebody in your marketing department, and many people in your marketing department have Adobe Creative Suite. So Adobe Creative Suite, Premiere, Illustrator, Photoshop, the whole 9 yards. Now, for whatever reason, this is a junior level person in your department, and so you don't want to spend $1,500 for a software suite for this junior level person. They are there to get coffee, not to create billboards or whatever else. Well, here's the thing. They feel sad. They feel left out. Well, if the company's not going to buy them Adobe Creative Suite, they're just going to go to Pirate Bay and download it themselves. And then they download, Adobe from Pirate Bay. That creates a lot of its own legal issues on its own. But what they don't understand, because they are junior level people that haven't really been in the real world, is not only did they install the Adobe Creative Suite, but they installed a lot of add-ons. The folks over at Pirate Bay were so kind to give numerous add-ons to that Adobe Creative Suite, and remote access tools, and God knows what else is in there. So be careful what you download, especially on company systems. And then turn your computer off. I actually think this is interesting, and this is actually directly coming from the FBI. So this is not advice we have given for a while. So it used to be turn your computer off at the end of the day, and then for a long time it was never turn your computer off. Now the FBI is actually recommending that you do turn your computer off. The reason being is with high-speed internet services, when you have a computer and it's turned on but you walk away from it, if it has been compromised by bots or whatever else, as long as it's on, as long as it's connected to the network or the internet, it can automatically do whatever the hell the hacker wants it to do. And so simply by literally just turning computers off at the end of the day, that means, at least for 12 to 14 hours per day, cross your fingers, at least for that amount of time, even if they have been compromised, they can't do anything. The hackers can't do anything with it because they are actually turned off. Again, if you're going to be hacking people's systems, one of the best times to do it is 2 o'clock in the morning, right? If you're trying to compromise a company's systems, if you try to compromise company systems at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, somebody might notice that there's a problem, there's a glitch with printing, computers start to reboot, all kinds of weird crap happens, right? And then IT person gets called and they start saying, uh-oh, we're getting hacked, no, right? Here's the thing, if you hack or you attack these computers at 2 o'clock in the morning, even if things don't go to plan, even if things get glitchy, even if a couple of computers reboot, nobody's there to see. Nobody's there to notice. Their systems are getting compromised, all hell and back. So if you just turn off your computer, again, 12 to 14 hours a day, it is no longer a threat vector for your particular environment. One of the big things that I will say, I get into a lot of trouble with this because it's not the kind of stuff that you're supposed to say, but I would actually argue cybersecurity really is simply equals good administration. If you are a good administrator, you by default generally have good cybersecurity. Now again, don't get me wrong, I know like some cybersecurity people out there will lose their minds. Look, there is a reason that some people get a master's degree in cybersecurity. There's a reason some people get a PhD in cybersecurity. As with many things, I am not arguing about the very high level cybersecurity professionals, the people that can actually find malware and then essentially dissect malware to understand what is going on. That is a cybersecurity professional. Somebody like turning on firewalls and updating computers and doing that kind of stuff, you know, they're just doing good administration, right? If more people did more good administration, we'd have a lot less problems. Again, if you do proper patch management, you stop having the problems of things that haven't been patched. You know, if you do good user account control, you stop having problems. If you have good privileges, basically the permissions that people have on the network and the devices, right? If everybody in your network has the appropriate permissions to their computer and the resources on the network, even if they do theoretically download some kind of malware or some kind of ransomware, here's the thing, right? If the user does not have the ability to install something onto their computer, QuickBooks or Napster or whatever else, when they accidentally download that ransomware and they double click the ransomware, guess what? If the permissions are set properly, that ransomware isn't going to get installed on the computer because they don't have the permission to install anything onto the computer itself, right? Most cybersecurity is, you know, simply just proper system administration, the same crap that you're going to learn whenever you get an MCSE. Patch management, user group policies, clean up your network and server room. Again, the kind of work senior sysadmins never want to do. Just going through, how many folks in 2021, I have this question, riddle me this, riddle me that. Let's put some money on the table. How many people that are sysadmins right now that are watching this video, can you guarantee you have absolutely no jet direct print servers on your network sitting somewhere behind a file cabinet or something? So jet direct print servers. So print servers are now normally built directly into printers. They actually used to be their own little devices, almost like an Apple TV or a Roku or something. You basically plugged your printer into that, then you plugged the network cable into that, and then that turned it into a network compatible printer. So, you know, those were really popular 15, 20 years ago. When was the last time you actually went through just the facility, not your infrastructure, the facility, and just saw how many grody, disgusting little server-type devices are sitting behind file cabinets and all that kind of stuff? Again, unfortunately, a lot of people, you know, that's not their job. They are there for group policies or whatever the hell else it is. They're not there to clean up the server room. They're not there to clean out networking equipment that's not supposed to be there anymore. They're not there to do those lowly jobs. And here's the thing, if you're not there to do those lowly jobs where you clean out equipment that's not supposed to be there, you know, hey, if I'm a hacker, if I'm a disgruntled employee, and I plug this directly into your network, and I throw it behind a file cabinet somewhere, if you're never bothering to go actually inspect your own damn facility, this thing will sit there and mine the hell out of your network, basically until its own CPU fails. So, you know, it's just good administration. Now, one of the big things to say, again, I get into a lot of trouble when I talk about this kind of stuff because this is not the kind of stuff that technology professionals are supposed to worry about. Eli, we're supposed to worry about frameworks and functions and API calls. We're not supposed to worry about licensing and regulations and legal issues. Anyways, one of the big things that I would say is remember, if you're going to be doing cybersecurity for your company, for your organization, one of the most important things is not the intrusion detection system or anything else. It's your employee cybersecurity policy that all of your employees have signed the dotted line on. So one of the big issues, especially in the United States, we're going to start seeing this in more countries, especially over in Europe, all the countries over in Europe, is the whole, what is the privacy expectation of the employee, right? So I come from the owner world, right? I own Silicon Dojo. This is all my equipment. If I hand this computer over to an employee, I consider it my property. So if I need to get into the computer for some reason, if I want to see something on the computer for some reason, I feel since it's my property as the business owner, I should just be able to grab the system and do whatever it is that I want to do with it. Here's the thing, from a legal standpoint, there is a concept of expectation of privacy. What is the expectation of the employee? And if you have not created something like an employee cybersecurity policy, you can find out your employee is doing something asininely stupid. You can fire them for doing something asininely stupid, and then you can get sued for firing them because they had an expectation of privacy that you violated. Because remember, many times at the end of the day, it's the boss's fault. So one of the things to be thinking about is what your cybersecurity policy looks like. This is just a website called betterteam.com. They have a cybersecurity policy. I am not telling you to use to copy the template for this cybersecurity policy. I thought it was just an interesting thing to take a look at. If we look at here, basically they have some basic stuff. So you do things like give an introduction, talk about what the cybersecurity policy is. You talk about the purpose of the cybersecurity policy. Now, this is one of those things where I'll smack the bosses and the managers on the hand out there. Is a lot of times, it's kind of funny, like bosses and managers really like to micromanage their employees, but then they don't really have to want to think about what they are doing. An important thing to be thinking about when you're doing cybersecurity, especially when you start using all of these technology tools in order to do management, is to really think about the purpose of of whatever you're doing and what the scope is. Where does it start? Where does it end? And one of the things that this does is it kind of protects everybody. It makes sure that the employees understand what is the right side of the line and the wrong side of the line. They make it pretty crystal clear. And then it also makes sure that the managers don't get stupid with rules and just kind of create these huge, massive rules that nobody really understands why they exist, why they're important, and anything else, and it engenders a lot of anger and aggravation from the employee base. It also can give your managers far too much power. Again, remember, as a boss, as an owner of a company, the managers are my employees too. When I talk about employees, and whenever I talk about employees, everybody thinks I'm like screaming about the warehouse managers. Oh, the directors are my employees. The managers are my employees, right? The division heads are my employees. They're all employees as far as I'm concerned. And just like a warehouse person or a salesperson might do something asinine stupid, just like back in the day when I worked in the corporate world, our salespeople were installing Napster onto their company systems and then killing their company systems, just like they were stupid enough to do that. One of the problems you have is managers, if you don't narrow the scope on what they're allowed to basically punish people for, they just start going hog wild sometimes. And so by creating a purpose and a scope for your cybersecurity policy, it basically makes sure everybody understands what is supposed to be occurring. Basically defining things like what is confidential data. Again, an important thing to think about your company. In the modern world, you have a lot of managers out there, everything's confidential. Well, if you make everything confidential in your company, it's just not going to work out well. I've seen companies that try to do that. It just pisses everybody off. Something for you to be thinking about. What data is actually important for your company? And then as you sit there and you think about the confidential data and what data is important for your company, then as an owner, as a manager, the other thing you should be asking yourself is how are you actually protecting that data? If you are telling your employees this data is so important that if they let it out in the real world that they can be fired, right? You are going to be terminated if you let this data out. It is that important. Have you verified that data is getting backed up? Have you verified that your local CRM solution has actually been updated within the past year and has antivirus and has all of that stuff? If it is so important, are you making sure that you're doing your job to actually keep it secure? Device security, talking about what kind of different devices you can use, password, what the minimum size of passwords and all kinds of different things are. Personal use, talking about how company employees can actually use their system for personal use. Again, one of the big issues in the real world nowadays is you hand this computer off to your employee, they take it, they do their 12-hour shift, they do their 8, 10, 12-hour shift typing away, and then at the end of it, it's COVID time, and they're lonely, and they don't have anything else to do, and you just gave them this fancy computer that's actually pretty fast, and they decide to do things we're not going to talk about here. Are they allowed to do that? Right? Can you fire them? Can you discipline them for that? Email security, transferring data, again, big thing with confidentiality, and then disciplinary action, actually explaining to the employees what will happen to them if they violate the cybersecurity policy. And then the other hard thing for management, is then actually following through. If your employees do things within the cybersecurity policy that are incorrect, they do actually need to get punished. So you need to have a cybersecurity policy like this so that, again, every employee signs off on it, and then everybody's in the clear. Again, as a system administrator, this is something that you really do have to be concerned about, right? So you have the owner of the company. The owner of the company comes to you and says, this employee quit. They didn't give us the password or whatever. For some reason, it's not on Active Directory, so we can't access it normally. So we need you to crack the password of this system and then give us all of the emails on the system. Yeah, that's a request right there. There is actually a question about whether or not that is legal. Even though that is a company-owned computer, even though that computer was given to the employee for company work, when you start going through and you start cracking open and taking a look at emails and all that kind of stuff, are you violating their expectation of privacy? If you had them sign the dotted line on the cybersecurity policy, you are absolutely in the clear. Screw them, whatever you get, you get. If not, you could run into all kinds of weird issues. Beyond the cybersecurity policy, we then get to an important thing I want a lot of folks to be thinking about out there, is that architectures change. Now, one of the big problems that I see in the technology world, so I've been doing technology since 1996. It's kind of creepy since I've come to Asheville. Do you know how many people I've met in Asheville that were born in 1996 or later? Yeah, I have gotten to that age. I have gotten to the age where professional tech folks were born after I shipped off to basic training. That's a hell of a thing. But anyways, one of the problems that I've noticed over the 20-some odd years, decades, I can say that now, decades I've been in the tech industry, is that for a lot of folks in the tech industry, basically they bust their butt to get to a certain level. They bust their butt to get the MCSE or the CCIE or whatever the certification is of the era, and they get up there and they start making money and they start feeling important and they are kings of their realm. And you know what's really weird? They kind of like stop. I noticed this, like my father. My father actually got his PhD years and years and years ago. And one of the funny things, I remember after he got his PhD, I asked him, I was like, oh, so Dad, are you going to go for anything else? And he looked me square in the eye and said, no, I got my PhD, I am done. Here's the thing, he's an engineer, right? Gravity and all that kind of stuff doesn't really change. In the IT world, it does change. It changes every 5 to 10 years massively. One of the problems that you have, though, is a lot of folks feel like they're my father. They get to a certain level in technology and they say, I have learned what I need to know. And then they kind of stop. Right? And the problem is, as time keeps moving along, they're still building out infrastructure and deploying their infrastructure the same way they did once they became an important person, and all kinds of nastiness can start happening to the company, basically because of people using outmoded methodologies of creating architecture. One of the best quotes. I actually memorized this quote when I was 17 years old. It's kind of funny. I was in this place and there was like this old rundown mall. There's an old rundown mall. It had like a flea market in it. It was like one of those weird, creepy places you go to like when you're a teenager. And I actually remember this quote. I actually memorized this quote. It was like scribbled. It was like, scribbled a graffiti on one of the walls. I saw the greatest minds of my generation, cold, shivering, naked in the dawn of a new age. I just want you to think about that for a second. Because for anybody watching this video, this is your future. However amazing you are right now, however great you are right now, however much money you're making right now, whatever accolades that you're getting right now, you are going to be naked in the next new age. And the problem that we run into is, right, a lot of folks don't move on. Once you get to that high level position, you kind of stick around even when your betters are trying to come up and move you aside. And this is important to be thinking about from an architecture standpoint. So when we talk about architecture, remember, security is built into your architecture. How you design your infrastructure is going to have a lot of cybersecurity implications, right? So back in the old days, mainframes. So in the very old days where you had mainframes and dumb terminals, remember that? All the compute was in the mainframe, the different dumb terminals connected to the mainframe. Many times the mainframe wasn't even networked, right? So as long as you had good password control, as long as you did your good backups, cybersecurity is relatively easy for the time period. Then we go to a client-server architecture, right? We realize, oh, hey, we can put compute power into each individual computer. They can then basically access a server for server resources, email, DNS, all of that kind of stuff. This is a new architecture. But when you develop for this new architecture, you now have new cybersecurity implications. You now have to worry about security on the host, right? Dumb terminals. For a dumb terminal, more or less, all you have to worry about is username and passwords, right? Because dumb terminals aren't going to get viruses. Dumb terminals, you can't get spyware or whatever else. They're just a dumb terminal. They're basically just a keyboard and mouse with a really damn long cable, right? You go over to client-server architecture, you now have to be rethinking about how you do cybersecurity. Again, 10 years or so ago, once everybody started going to the cloud for a lot of things, again, software as a service, we started using more Salesforce, more that kind of stuff. We go to something called service-oriented architecture. So instead of worrying about specific servers, we look at more of the services themselves. We then try to use those servers. We build out our architecture. There are different cybersecurity implications for when you're dealing with things in the service-oriented architecture world. We are now looking at a serverless architecture world. So a serverless architecture world is where compute and a lot of other things are actually done up in the serverless architecture. Basically, you can call compute just from an API call. When I do my classes about computer speech recognition or computer vision, a lot of things that I'm doing, these are now serverless architecture, right? You're sending an image, you're sending voice. It's running the compute, it's sending back a JSON to you. And there's security implications for how you design systems for that. And so an important thing to be thinking about right now is we're going to a remote workers infrastructure. And what does that look like? No, that's a question right there. No, that wasn't rhetorical. What does a remote workers infrastructure look like? Because one of the things, like everybody's really excited right now about this whole work from home. I have no idea. Let me tell you, as somebody that's worked from home for a long time at this point, I have no idea why people are so excited to work from home. But anyways, they're still excited to work from home. But one of the important things to understand is in the old world, the pre-COVID world, if you have 90% of your employees in the office and 10% of your employees out on the road, salespeople, executives, that type of thing, right? There is an implicit security structure there, right? If I work in the office or the HR person, a secretary, or the lawyer works in the office and they get locked out of their computer because they forget their password or do something else, they leave the cap locks on, they get locked out, right? If they walk down to the help desk, there's a lot of security there. There's a lot of security built into that structure. In order for me to get my password reset, I actually have to walk into the building. So any kind of physical security the building has, I have to get past that physical security. I actually have to have a computer, a terminal that I'm able to access. I have to know what my user account is. I have to then go to the help desk. I have to say, hey, Bob, Sue, Tyrone, whoever it is, hey, I locked myself out of the computer again. They look at me and they know me because I've locked myself out of my computer the past 10 times because that's how users are, right? There's a lot of security that occurs in the physical world. When you have a building and everybody is inside the building, there's a lot of implicit security there that disappears when you go to a remote worker infrastructure. When you go from having 90% of your workforce in the facility to having 90% of your workforce outside of the facility, that massively changes how you build your infrastructure. Again, things to be thinking about. Things like Office 365, so Exchange Server. Exchange Server is email server, any kind of the communication server type services. There are a lot of people out there, a lot of IT folks out there that are freaking shivering their little hoo-haws off in the dawn of a new age, and they don't want to get rid of their Exchange servers. Why should I get rid of my Exchange server? Because it's vulnerable to high hell and back, you yahoo. Because think about this, if you have an Exchange server that is on your premises, that is a Windows server. That Windows server is on the internal LAN. That Windows server has Exchange installed onto it. Most likely if you have a large Exchange server, you probably have some kind of Exchange cluster, so you may actually have multiple Exchange servers, right? All of those servers could be compromised. All of those servers could get hacked. If somebody's able to compromise one account or one thing within that server, they're able to compromise the entire server. 90% of your workforce is now a remote, right? Any one of those 90% of people might be compromised by a hacker or a malicious actor. If they're able to use that connection to get into your Exchange server, they understand how your Exchange server operates, so they're able to compromise your Exchange server. Once your Exchange server is compromised, your entire internal network is completely open to them to go, hog wild on. Whereas if you use something like Office 365, okay, so let's say her account does get compromised. Somebody uses a keylogger or whatever else, figures out what her password is in Office 365, normal employee, so a normal employee account, they get into their Office 365 account and they get her contact list. They do get her emails. I mean, I'm not going to downplay this. It might be bad, but they're not going to compromise the entire email server. They're not going to, and definitely if they can't compromise the entire email server, they're not going to be able to compromise your entire internal network. So using Office 365 actually has a lot of security built into it. Again, Salesforce. So back in the day for our CRM solutions, we used to have a local CRM server. Man, that's a server. That has an operating system. That has firmware. That has all kinds of stuff going on, right? You have salespeople out in the real world that are deciding to download whatever the hell they want onto their computers because they are salespeople. Eli, don't tell me what to do with my computer. You know how much money I bring to this business? You will fix my Napster. Well, here's the thing, right? If they're connecting to an internal CRM solution with something like VPN access, they download, who the hell knows what salespeople are downloading nowadays? I don't want to know, don't gotta tell me. Anyways, they download something stupid. They use VPN access to then connect into the internal CRM server. That CRM server might not be up to date or anything or whatever else. That CRM server gets compromised. That CRM server is on the internal network. All hell breaks loose. So again, things we think about like voice over IP. So having telephone systems. If you have 90% of the people in the office and 10% out of the office, you may have an old-fashioned VIA telephone system or some kind of internal VoIP system. That might make sense. If 90% of your employees are outside the office, they're working from home, maybe it makes more sense to go over to a company like Nextiva that actually offers basically a telephone service, software as a service. Just like Gmail offers email as a service, and this company called Nextiva, you have a full voice over IP server with all kinds of wacky functions to it. But it's all hosted by them. And then to be thinking about, again, when you start thinking about your infrastructure, then what about the things that you can't send off to software as a service? What are the things that you basically can't outsource? Maybe you have databases, maybe you have some kind of internal legacy system that people are using. Then thinking about, okay, how are these 90% of the employees going to be accessing those legacy type systems, but do it in such a way that it doesn't create more vectors of attack than necessary, right? This is an important thing to be thinking about. Again, you think about this with Twitter. Remember Twitter with their famous part-time CEO? Yep. Nothing quite fully states my feeling about the modern, social media tech industry like Jack Dorsey. Part-time CEO. Hey, we're going through COVID. Hey, we're going through one of the greatest economic crises that our country may ever know. and their CEO is still working 20 hours a week. Yay! Anyways, Twitter, last year, Florida boy, not Florida man, Florida boy was able to compromise their systems. Why? Jack Dorsey, their part-time CEO, decided basically everybody should be able to work from home. They apparently didn't really think about how this remote infrastructure should work very well, or they thought about it and they just hired incompetent people. One or the other, I'm not saying which. And so basically this Florida boy was able to use social engineering and a number of other attacks to be able to call in to Twitter's help desk, internal help desk, to say, hey, I got locked out of this account, to get passwords reset. And essentially by using some stupidly simple attack vectors, was able to compromise something like 100 very, very prominent accounts like Elon Musk and Obama and that type of thing in order to post stupid cryptocurrency, con or whatever in order to make about $100,000. But think about that, right? This is going to come as a shock. It's going to be a shocker to you. But when you have a part-time CEO, maybe your CEO doesn't have enough time to think about the really big problems that your company is going to be dealing with when you massively change basically how your infrastructure should look for this modern world. And so this is a very important thing to be thinking about. And again, this is one of those pivotal times. Because again, I'm not being funny, not being joking, not being sarcastic. We don't really know what this infrastructure should look like. We know mainframe, we know client server, we know SOA, we know serverless. Basically know how those should look. Yeah. We don't really know what the hell that should look like. So this is one of those things just to be considering for yourself, right? If you are in a company, if you're an organization leader, and you start saying everybody should work from home, how is the help desk used? How is communication with the help desk authenticated? If somebody calls in and said, I lost my password, right? That's no longer on an internal phone line, perhaps. That's no longer somebody walking up in person, right? There's a lot of security built there. So when somebody calls up and says, I need my password reset, how are you going to verify? How are you going to authenticate that user without a username or password? What are the additional ways that you can authenticate the user? Answer, I don't know, but you've got to be thinking about this. The myth of physical server security. This is one of the things I love. Oh, you talk about some IT administrators, they're getting frostbite in the dawn of a new age, right? There is this idea, especially for my generation of techs, just to be clear here, I'm not laughing about the millennials. I'm laughing about my generation of techs at this point. Anyways, there's this idea like, if I can see my server, it is protected. Kind of reminds me, kind of think about their servers, kind of think the way my Chihuahua thinks of me. It's really interesting. Whenever there's a thunderstorm or whenever there's anything that scares my Chihuahua, she runs to me, hops on my lap, and somehow thinks I can protect her. Yep, I'm going to protect you from a lightning strike, little girl. Don't worry about it, right? There's this idea, daddy will protect me. We'll let her keep thinking that. But, there's that feeling, if you see something, if you know it, if you can touch it, this thing is somehow more physically secure. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. It's just completely wrong. One of the important things to realize, right? Whenever we talk about things like hacking, is if your device is connected to the network, which is then connected to the internet, it can be hacked just like anything else. Oh, your Azure server or your AWS server was hacked? Well, that server that you see, you can be sitting there looking at it. You can be staring at it all day. And you don't even realize it's getting hacked, right? It's connected to the internet. If the updates haven't been done on it, if you've left the SSH open or anything else, guessing because you can see your server does not mean it's more secure. It's important to understand cloud servers, so again, up on Azure, AWS, DigitalOcean, Vultr, whoever the hell you want to use, can't be stolen. Again, remember we talk about biases? I spent a long time in Baltimore. Here's the thing about crackheads. Let me explain something to you about crackheads. See, crackheads, this is going to come as a shock. They don't actually know a lot about computers. See, they know a lot about crack. They know they really like crack. They are so focused on crack that they don't really understand computers very well. So when they broke into your office, they don't really know the difference between a high-end gaming machine and an Active Directory server. So if they break into your office and there's a computer and they grab it to go sell it for 25 bucks in order to get their next hit, they're not really thinking about what that server does. Had this happen in Baltimore. So you can have a crackhead break into your office and steal your Active Directory server. How secure was that, right? The cloud servers can't be burnt in a fire. Again, so right now, to summer of 2021, there are a hell of a lot of wildfires going out. Yeah, hey, in the technology world, out in California, out in the West, lots and lots and lots of fires. Now, obviously, this isn't hitting companies like Apple or Google or whatever, but how many small businesses is this hitting? If a wildfire goes through and wipes out a business park, right? How many people in that business park had their Active Directory server literally just melt? Can't die from lightning strikes. Again, in the Baltimore area, we had Comcast. We actually had some competition for ISPs in the Baltimore area. Can I just say I missed that? I miss competition from ISPs. In Asheville, there's not much competition. You can tell. Anyways, one of the big providers there was Comcast. They do cable internet. For some reason, I don't know why it is, their infrastructure was horrible when it came to lightning strikes. So basically they use, they use like, cable, thick cable in order to run the signal, cable. For whatever reason, if lightning strikes within frickin' 50 miles of one of those damn cables, it fries all of your equipment. And I had this happen. I had this happen to clients. Actually, I had this happen to myself. One of the reasons I went over to Verizon, I actually liked Comcast all the way up until the day all of my networking equipment got fried. Then I went over to Comcast because fiber optic lines don't have to worry about getting hit by lightning strikes. But again, things to be thinking about. On-prem servers, so on-premises servers, can be hacked from the outside world, right? If this is connected to the internet, it can be hacked just like a server sitting up on AWS, and can be DDoS'd. Right? Again, one of the things to think about, like with, low orbit ion cannon or some other stupid ass piece of software like that, if somebody figures out what your external static IP address is and they just start hammering the hell out of it for craps and giggles, right? You've still got problems. So again, this is one of those things to be thinking about when you're thinking about your architecture. Think about building your architecture off of reality. Think about building your architecture about your actual use case, and then think about what the actual threat assessment is. Very, very important thing to be thinking about here. So past that, let's go start talking about some of the security stuff itself. So operational security. Operational security is something that is not talked about enough, and is a very important thing to be thinking about whenever you're thinking about your cybersecurity, whatever that you're going to be doing, right? People cannot hack. People cannot steal. People cannot cause, problems against things that they don't know exist. Right? If people don't know that your server exists, or they don't know where your servers are, it is very hard to go after those servers. I think about this, the story I've been telling lately when it comes to hacking, and we talk about operational security, is back when I was doing telephone system administration work. So I dealt with Avaya Definity Systems, if you know what the hell that is. I wonder how many... Anyways, we're not going to go into that. I wonder how many people are younger than Definity Systems. But anyway, they're telephone systems, right? So there's these telephone cabinets, essentially you secured to the wall, the ones that I dealt with. They had cards inside, basically look like PCI cards in a standard PC computer, only they're a hell of a lot bigger. And each one of those cards was $30,000, somewhere between $20,000 to $45,000, depending on what card you bought. And you had a lot of cards in those things, right? So if you wanted, so many telephone lines, you had to buy a $30,000 card per certain number of telephone lines. If you wanted an auto attendant, there is a card for that. If you wanted voicemail, there is a card for that. Every service that you needed, there was an additional $20,000, $30,000 card you slipped into one of these things. So when you had a full box with all the cards in there, it was about $100,000 and some odd box sitting up there. So anyways, these criminals realized that those cards were worth a lot of money. And so one of the things that they would do is that they would dress up as like telephone repair people. They would go into people's telephone closets. They would open up the Avaya telephone systems and just start pulling out the cards and shoving them into their knapsacks or whatever, and basically walking out before anybody knew what the hell was going on. So one of the big problems there is that people knew where the server room was. They knew where the telephone cabinet was. This was something that people could easily figure out. They said, okay, I know what I want to go after at this company, and then they were able to figure out how to actually go after that particular thing. One of the things that you should be thinking about is operational security. How can you create your environment so that it's as confusing as possible to the people that do not need to know particular things about the environment? Again, it's the old thing. I've actually seen this in the military world, where you go to a hallway. So a lot of times you watch like these spy movies. You'll read a spy book, and they talk about how some young person is told to go to door 10, and they walk into a hallway, and then there's just a whole bunch of doors with no numbering on any of the doors, and then there's this whole laughing moment where they have to figure out which door is door number 10. That's actually an awesome form of security, right? Again, think about it, right? If you have hackers, or if you have penetration testers or whatever else, and they're trying to come in to compromise your systems, and they can't figure out literally where the hell the networking closets are, it makes their life a hell of a lot harder, right? If somebody can figure out where the networking closet is, can walk up to the networking closet, can pick the lock, can get into the networking closet, and then can sit there all night mining the hell out of your network, that's something that's relatively difficult to detect if somebody's very good at it. If they walk into your environment and all of a sudden they're walking in circles, and they're going up and they're going down and they're going over here and they're going over there, and they're just trying to figure out where the hell the networking closet is, that's kind of like a big red flashing light. Hey, this person doesn't know where to go. Somebody should probably confront them and ask them why the hell they're in the building, right? One of the things I would say is, if Silicon Dojo ever gets to the point where we actually have like a real server room, you can bet there's going to be a bathroom sign in that server room with a, oops, sorry, toilets are out of order. Oh, yeah, that's our bathroom, but it's currently out of order. I guess you can use a bathroom over there, right? Again, things to be thinking about. When you set up in your environment, things to... do people know what your infrastructure looks like? Whether you're using AWS, whether you're using Azure, whether you're using DigitalOcean, whether you're using Vultr, Linode, whoever else you're using, do people need to know that? Again, one of the big problems in the social media world right now is everybody wants to broadcast what they're doing. This is what we're doing. Why? I don't want to tell that to anybody. When I tell the world we are proudly using Microsoft products, then that means a whole bunch of people out there go, oh, I understand the vector of attack for Microsoft products. I understand how I'm going to go after your company. If you just say, yep, we use stuff. Yeah, around here we use stuff, and we got systems. We even got a database or two. Oh, really? So what kind of databases do you use? Yes, sirree. We use the ones with, they got something called tables on them. We use table databases. What does that mean? I don't know. That's for the smart people out there to understand. I'm just, I'm just a lonely old little system administrator up here in Asheville, North Kakalaki. I don't know how any of these systems work, right? But it's important to be thinking about, like, hey, do people understand how your infrastructure operates? And if they do they need to understand so much? One of the big things, again, coming from the Baltimore area, is physical security. If a crackhead breaks into your building, really happens, steals your Active Directory server. Oh, what did you do to protect that Active Directory server? A lot of people have an Active Directory server just shoved under some desk somewhere, and that's providing all the services, right? Something to be thinking about is if somebody is actually able to put their hands onto a physical machine, they can cause all kinds of havoc with that physical machine. They can put a Malduino on that physical machine, basically a little USB device you plug into a server or other kind of computer, and it automatically starts running commands. They can do that kind of thing. They can try to destroy the server. They can try to access the server somehow. Plug in a keyboard and mouse and just start seeing what they can get to the server, the whole 9 yards. One of the things to think about is, even if you just have a server rack in your facility and you have a front door and a back door on that server rack and you lock them, put the key somewhere, then even if somebody sees your servers, it's going to be difficult for them to actually access the machines and do something with them. Again, if you have a crackhead that comes into your environment and you have a server rack and all of your servers are nicely racked within this rack, so screwed with the rails and the whole 9 yards, and has a front door and it has a back door, crackheads need crack, but they're not going to do that much work in order to get them, right? They're going to go and try to find something that's a little bit easier to sell. And so hopefully they're not going to steal your infrastructure. One of the things to be thinking about is, like, one of the things that we used to sell is digital surveillance systems. It's so funny with crackheads. Baltimore gave the best stories. Baltimore gave you the kind of stories that most people don't have as system administrators. One of the problems you can have with digital surveillance systems, so digital surveillance systems, you have all of these surveillance cameras that then plug into basically a computer that then stores the video files, and they're able to access those video files remotely, the whole 9 yards. Here's the thing. Computer's a computer to a crackhead. What happens when your crackhead comes in? Steals your surveillance computer. Yep. Yeah, our surveillance computer definitely recorded the crackhead stealing the surveillance computer. If only we could get our hands on that surveillance computer, we'd have all the evidence we need to arrest that crackhead. Unfortunately, crackhead stole the surveillance computer. Real world. So one of the things is, even if you don't have like a full server rack or quarter server rack or half server rack, is they just have these server boxes. We're probably going to have this when we move over to the new office for a couple of things. Basically what they do is you secure these things to the wall, you anchor these damn things to the wall, you put the server in, it has ventilation panels, or at least buy them with ventilation panels, and then the door comes up, the door locks, and then you just have kind of this ugly black box looking thing that does not look like something a crackhead can sell for $25 to a local pawn shop. And so this is something to consider. The other thing to be thinking about nowadays is kind of really cool in 2021. Let me tell you, doing sysadmin work in 2021 is so much better than it was in 2000. There are so many products you can now just basically buy off of Amazon that didn't exist before. And one of the things is cages. So one of my old stories, when we talk about cybersecurity, is one of the first facilities that I went to in the corporate world back when I was still wet behind the ears and I knew everything, right? I had studied for my MCSE and I was a professional, right? I remember going and one of my offices that I had to deal with, they had a server room, again, pretty expensive server room, $500,000 server room that they happened to have mop buckets in. You know what I'm saying? Like high-end equipment, high-end telephone systems, the whole 9 yards, right beside the mop buckets, right beside the chlorine bleach, right beside all the utility closet stuff. Anyways, I went to the manager and I said, this is not good security. This is unacceptable. I am 24 years old, I am an MCSE, and I am telling you, general manager that's been doing your job for almost as long as I've been alive, this is unacceptable. And I still remember the general manager looking at me and saying, Eli. Now, I have been in this office for like 5 years now. I've been from the top to the bottom. And here's the thing. I have not found any other utility closet in this building. So, Eli, just as soon as you find me your hidden utility closet so I can move all of that stuff to it, I will be more than happy to move all of that stuff to a utility closet that we all know doesn't exist. Yep. You're like, oh, right? So, one of the things to be thinking about, again, in the modern world, where you can just go to Amazon and buy a lot of cool stuff like cages now, is if you have a room where, let's say, you have your servers, you have your networking equipment and everything else, and then it has to be shared with other things. Because, again, that is reality. Whatever brand new MCSEs may imagine, the reality is in the real business world, it doesn't work that way. What's really cool now is it's a lot easier to go to a general manager or go to a boss and say, okay, look, this room has mops and it has servers. Let me just dedicate the back half of the room to the servers. We will put up a physical cage so nobody can screw with the servers. Can I get $1,000 to do that? Yeah, sure. Yeah, go, do it. Right? So this is something to be thinking about. Again, think about within your environment, within the reality that you're dealing with, within the situation that you're dealing with, how can you make your things more physically secure? Again, you may already have server racks. Just put the frickin' front and back door on the server racks and actually lock the things. Makes your environment a hell of a lot more secure, relatively simple. Again, your surveillance system, or maybe an Active Directory server or whatever else, right? You've got your little telephone closet or your whatever else. Just put that server into a metal box, lock it, so it can't be stolen. If you have more sophisticated equipment, again, even if it's being shared with the mop buckets, because that's reality, you can put up a cage. It protects your systems a little bit better. Things to be thinking about. Locks. Locks are absolutely wonderful, again, especially with employees. One of the things to realize about employees is most employees are not trying to do the stupid things that they end up doing. It's kind of funny, and like in the modern world, we have this really idea that everybody's antagonistic and everybody's going after each other. One of the things that I found is, in reality, most people are actually trying to be very helpful. The ironic thing is one of the biggest problems for businesses is actually people are trying to be too helpful. They're so helpful they get themselves into trouble. And so one of the things to be thinking about, again, when you're talking about the security of your environment, is if you have locks and only certain people have access to get through those locks, that solves a lot of your problems with your employees, frankly, trying to be too nice, right? If somebody walks into the facility and says, hey, I'm with Orkin, right? So insect killing company. I was hired by the property management company. I need to go through the premises and spray poison, right? It's just its own thing. Anyways, right, the very helpful receptionist may, oh, okay. And they may lead the person around to like certain areas, but if your server room is locked and your major facilities and all that kind of stuff, anything that needs to be secure is actually locked, when the Orkin person says, oh, can I get into this room? Like, oh, that's locked. Let me go talk to the manager. The receptionist then goes talk to the manager and says, hey, the Orkin person is here. They need to get into a couple of locked rooms. And the manager can say, what the hell are you talking about? What do you mean the Orkin person is here? Let me go talk to the Orkin person. And they walk out and say, hi, who are you now? I'm with Orkin. I was hired by the property manager. Yeah, I don't think you're supposed to be here. Hold on a second. Boop, 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 boop. Hey, property manager? Yeah, why the hell do we have an Orkin person here? Oh, you don't know either? Great. Out. Get out. Right? By having things locked, you keep people from trying to be too helpful. One of the big things is lock stop crimes of opportunity, and as I would argue, most crimes are actually crimes of opportunity. A lot of things occur simply because there's the ability for them to occur. So if you have locks, solves a lot of problems. One of the things to be thinking about from a cybersecurity standpoint is environmental considerations. Again, when we talk about cybersecurity, a lot of people think about, the Chinese hackers. Oh no, the Chinese hackers are after us or something like that. A big thing to realize is, sometimes, the spaghetti monster just hates you. It's not Chinese hackers. No, the spaghetti monster just wants to punish you for some reason. And so you get all kinds of stuff. Again, in the real world, you get fires, you get tornadoes, all those types of things. When I was creating this presentation, so literally on Wednesday, so I was doing this presentation, creating this presentation 2 days ago. So a little over a week ago at this point, we had flash floods through Germany where apparently a month's worth of rain came down in something like 2 hours, killed a whole bunch of people, and left devastation. This is Italy. They basically had the same type of thing and created devastation. This is a place called Moab. Actually really cool. If you're in the US, you've never been to Moab, go to Moab. Arches National Park, Islands of the Sky National Park. Islands of the Sky National Park. A lot of people don't talk about it. Absolutely amazing. Anyways, they had flash floods. And again, just since I'm in the Asheville area, to make people realize this isn't something that happens there. This is actually a flood. It happened 4 years ago. 4 years ago, this happened down in the Biltmore area, and you can see how high the water is. So that's the lights on the car, as for some reason they try to drive through the water, which is oh so smart. But think about it, right? If you have your server room, if you have your networking equipment or whatever in an area that can be flooded out, if your systems get wiped out for that reason, you could have a lot of problems. In the real world, I had a client of mine, made a lot of money off of this client. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for very stupid reasons. So anyways, I got them as a new client, and the previous consultant that they hadn't really done a good job. So I went through and I cleaned up all of their infrastructure, right? So I cleaned up their networking, I installed a digital surveillance system for them, I cleaned up their Active Directory, I dealt with Blackberry enterprise server. Did anybody ever have to deal with that? That was the most horrible piece of software that's ever existed. Blackberry, their stuff that went on an exchange server was absolutely horrible. Anyway, so I go through, I clean up all this stuff. They actually bought some more equipment from me. And so basically where all their networking and server equipment was, it was in an area of the building that was accessible actually to the public. And so I went to the CEO at a certain point in time and said, look, you've got a lot of valuable equipment down there now. It is all technically working. Everything is working perfectly. You're not having any problems anymore. But you really got to think about, what if there's a theft, or what if there's any kind of other problem? That's a bad place for your equipment to be. That it needs to be locked up. Basically what I was trying to tell them is they just needed to lock up that particular room and not have it be accessible to anybody who wanted to walk in there. Somewhere in this whole conversation came up the fact that they were in a floodplain. So up until this point, I had not known that they were in a floodplain. I actually lived in Baltimore. I literally didn't realize they were in a floodplain, and apparently they were in a floodplain. Here's the thing. Not only were they in a floodplain, but they, in order to have the building that they were in built, they had to agree with the county to let the bottom floor of their building flood if a flood came through. So they actually had breakaway walls. I did not realize this. They had 2 walls that were basically facing the river, and so if the river flooded, that floodwater would hit those walls. Those walls were designed to break away to literally allow the floodwater to go through the first floor of their building. You know, the first floor that I had just fixed up all this fancy equipment on. And so they then paid me to move everything to literally the other side of the building on the second floor when I said, what the hell do you mean? All of your networking equipment is in a floodplain. So again, in the real world, and this is where you have to sit there, and again, especially if you're a consultant and you're sitting there talking with clients, this is why, like, if you ever meet me in the real world, I throw out like a lot of weird questions. My wife is always surprised. Like, I'll just throw out all these bizarre questions. And one of the reasons that I do is I'm just so used to having reality be very bizarre. Like, things that you would not even imagine being an issue are an issue. Like, what do you mean you're legally required to have the first floor of your building flood? What? Anyways, past that, one of the big things to be thinking about with cybersecurity is logs for whatever is occurring within your infrastructure. So all of your networking, all of your computer equipment is able to create logs. Active Directory, your routers, firewalls, the whole 9 yards, they're able to create logs. The important thing to understand is after an event has occurred, the logs are one of the things that are going to help you figure out what happened during the event, or while an event is occurring, your logs can be used in order to figure out what the hell is happening and then be able to try to close any of your vulnerabilities. One of the big issues that we run into with logs, though, is that many times logs are off by default. I don't actually understand why this is in the modern world. So if you go back to Windows Server 2000, basically the modern, the event system is based off of the old 2000 system that was created. The reason they had a lot of logging off back then by default was simply the resource consumption. When you have a 1 gigahertz computer server that's basically providing all of these services to the network, literally simply logging things on that server many times would use too many resources. You could actually crash your server by logging everything. So by default, they turned all logging off, and then you had or most logging off, and then you had to go through there and actually turn certain logging on, depending on what you were looking for. And so one of the things to be thinking about is with your stuff, with your routers, with your firewalls, with your networking equipment, with your Active Directory systems and everything else, do you have logging turned on? Do you have specific things to look at? Again, like, so log on events. So do you log for when there's login failures, right? If somebody tries to log into the exact same account 50 times, that might be telling you there's a problem somewhere. If you're not actually logging those events, though, you would have no idea that they occurred. If you are not logging what's going on with your systems, it is almost impossible to understand what is going on with your systems. So do make sure to turn on your logs, but do realize it does take resources. So do that whole balancing act of turn on the logs you need and make sure your servers don't crash and all that kind of stuff. Beyond that, when you start talking about cybersecurity, passwords are a big deal. One of the things with passwords is make sure you have proper permissions for user accounts. One of the big issues, right? System administrators don't actually want to do their jobs a lot of the times. Oh, they'll give you excuses. Anyways. But one of the big problems is when users want to be able to install things onto their computers, when people want to add printers or whatever else, many times the initial permissions that users are given do not give them the permissions required to do what they want to do, to be able to install Adobe Reader or whatever else. So one of the big issues is many times administrators will just give them local administrator permission. I will give you full administrative rights on the local computer. Well, here's the thing. If your user is able to install Adobe Reader, they're also able to install ransomware. Right? So one of the things to be thinking about is do the users have the appropriate permissions for the jobs that they are responsible for? Make sure that users are logging in with the lowest required permissions. I think one of the main reasons we're getting hit by ransomware, I'm just going to throw this out there, spitball this one, is how many administrators out there check their email with global administrator accounts. They create their global administrator account, so basically they have root administration privileges for the entire domain, and then they're checking their email on it. Right, so here's the thing. If you're logging in with a normal user account, so as an administrator, many of the things that you do is just simple normal user functions. You check your email, you create documentation, you connect to the CRM solution, you do a lot of stupid things. When you're doing that kind of thing, you don't need to be changing group policies, you don't need to be changing permissions, you don't need to be adding computers to the domain or anything else. So one of the problems you have is that if administrators are using a user account level that's appropriate for what they're supposed to be doing, again, even if they get a spear phishing attack that has a link to some kind of ransomware executable, even if they click on that ransomware executable for some reason, most likely it will fail out. If you can't install Adobe, you're most likely not going to be able to install that ransomware. Not only that, but if they don't have the full permissions, even if the ransomware does get installed, your user account that you're logged into doesn't have permission to do much. It doesn't have root access to the profiles folder. It doesn't have root access to the database folder. It doesn't have root access to anything. So they're not able to access that to do something such as encrypt or do something stupid. One of the big problems is if you have an administrator account, basically the person is checking their email, they download and they install the ransomware. That ransomware then goes out. It sees a whole bunch of map drives. Hey, this is a map drive to the root of your database server. Hey, this is a map drive to the root of your profiles, all your profiles. Hey, here's something else. All of a sudden that is now completely visible to the ransomware. The ransomware goes there, tries to encrypt whatever it finds, tries to encrypt that root of the directory. It's, hey, look, they're logged in with an administrator level account. So therefore they're able to actually encrypt that root directory and all hell breaks loose. So try to make sure people are actually using the permission levels that they should. Disable old accounts. This is a real thing that happened. I think it was last year. I did a commentary video about this a little while ago. But basically, you had an employee, they were working for one company and then they went over to their competition. Right? So, and it was like really big competition. They were very, very, very competitive. And so when the employee went over to the competition, they were competing for some different types of contracts. And the employee that was now with the competition was like, I wonder if my user account still works. And so he started doing VPN access to his old company. Started seeing all the documentation for what his old company was doing and how they were trying to get new clients in the whole 9 yards. He would take all that information, he would put that into a nice report, and every other day he would basically give a presentation on the inside activities of their competition. Again, if you don't disable old accounts, that's the kind of crap that can happen. Again, like what happens when you fire? Again, because again, as a boss, one of your jobs as a boss is to lay people off. It is your job to fire people. Somebody's got to fire them. It's your job. What happens when we fire somebody and then they have a grudge? And here's the thing, like it's kind of interesting with how criminal minds work, right? Is when you first fire somebody, a lot of times people are pretty elated when they're first fired. Like there's this idea, thank golly, my chains have been, I have been set free, right? A lot of people, when they have jobs, they feel like their bosses are a-holes. They feel like their company is keeping them down. They feel like they are oh so valuable, but for some reason, they're not actually leaving the company that they're at for whatever reason to go off for greener pastures. So one of the things that happens is when you fire somebody, when you lay them off or terminate them or whatever you want to call it, right? One of the first things is elation. Yay! Like a lot of people go out, they drink beer, they're worried about the future and all that kind of stuff, but it's okay. They're finally set free. Here's a problem. That's how they are initially, and then as time goes by, they start burning through their savings, they start burning through their resources. For some reason, no other company has realized how amazeballs they are, and so they haven't been hired by anybody else, and so the resources start dwindling, and then they start looking back at the old company that laid them off or terminated them, and they start to get angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier. And this is one of those times when a lot of times workplace violence occurs, especially here in the United States. Many times when somebody grabs a gun and they go into the workplace and start shooting it up, what you'll actually see is they were actually fired like 2 months ago, but psychologically it took them a while to process, to get fully pissed off enough to go back in and shoot up the office. Well, we're geeks. We're geeks. And one of the things about geeks is a lot of geeks really aren't into violence. Again, my generation, when I was a teenager, we were out back just beating the crap out of each other. We used to watch Bloodsport and then And then we went outside and tried to do blood sport. Here's the thing in the modern world. A lot of youngins, they're not so much into that old violence type of thing. And so, if they get through that 2-month process, they get to the end of it, they get pissed off, they get depressed, and they want to prove a point to the old company that they're at, and they're not, thankfully, let's be clear, thankfully they're not willing to pick up a gun and do something. One of the things I can think of is, hey, I wonder if I still have, access. My user account still has access to the systems at the old company. And if the administrator is not doing their job, and at that 2-month mark when somebody is really, really, really pissed off, it becomes very easy for them to be able to access the network if their account still works and be able to drop things, again, viruses, ransomware, all kinds of stupidity they can try to drop into that network just because they are pissed off. Try to get rid of that vector of attack, right? When an employee leaves, basically the hour the employee leaves the company is the hour their account should be disabled. And one of the other things to be thinking about with that whole thing is also audit the in-use accounts. One of the big problems, a lot of administrators don't do their jobs. They don't want to do the boring, tedious stuff. I want to tell you a secret, boys and girls. It's all boring and tedious. But anyways, they don't want to do the stuff that they think is boring and tedious, and so one of the big problems is auditing the accounts that are actually in use. You as a system administrator, you come in, your predecessor didn't do auditing, didn't disable accounts when they were supposed to disable accounts. You have a 200-person company, and you have 600 user accounts in your Active Directory. You need to go through and you need to track every user account to a butt-in seat. If you cannot track a user account to a butt-in seat, you need to disable that user account. If you disable a user account that is actually in use, they will then call the help desk, and then you'll get a ticket to re-enable the account, and then it'll be fine. But this is one of those just tedious, crappy things that's part of your job. Two-factor authentication, so when we talk about passwords, two-factor authentication comes up. There's a lot of forms of two-factor authentication. At this point, basically with two-factor authentication, you have a username and password, which is the first factor of authentication, and then there's some other, right? So a lot of times when people think about two-factor authentication, they think about getting like a text message. So if you have Twitter two-factor authentication, Facebook, YouTube, whatever else, they'll send you a text message. There's a lot of other forms of two-factor authentication out there. There's Rsa Keys, so the Rsa Keys that have been around for decades at this point. Those are weird little keys that like usually government employees have that have this little countdown number on them. So that's a form of two-factor authentication. You have a YubiKeys. So this is actually supposed to be pretty good. I would not bet my life on it, but I've heard they're actually very good and very secure. These are little like USB keys. Basically, you can plug this into your computer, and that acts as a form of two-factor authentication. The nice part about this is it's actually a physical device. So whoever has that YubiKey, they basically have that two-factor authentication. So that can be used for a lot of different things. There's Google Authenticator. Again, there's text messaging, the whole 9 yards. Basically, one of the things you have to be thinking about two-factor authentication when you're thinking about your infrastructure, when your users, is basically what is compatible with what you're doing. Again, if you have Active Directory, some two-factor authentication will work with Active Directory, others won't. If you have some kind of web infrastructure system, some two-factor authentication will work with what you have, and some stuff won't. So when you're thinking about two-factor authentication, basically it's a very paint-by-numbers thing. These are the systems we have. These are the two-factor authentication schemes they work with. Pick one of those. Something to think about. So then we get to patch management. So patch management is a big thing. Again, one of the huge problems in the modern world, we talk about cybersecurity, all kinds of problems with IT infrastructure, is many times computers are simply not up to date. Operating system patches haven't been installed, Adobe patches haven't been installed, the whole 9 yards. One of the cool things now is there's a lot of software out there. So this is a little picture from Avast. There's a lot of automatic patch management software out there that will automatically deploy patches for you. And so this is something that you need to be thinking about with your organization. So back when I had my company, I had my employees, one of the big vectors for attacks that we saw at that period of time was actually old Java. So Java became very popular in the early 2000s. So let's say 2000 to 2003, everybody thought Java was going to take over the world. It was going to become the programming language for desktop apps. And then it didn't. People like it for servers and stuff, but whatever. It didn't really pan out for desktop apps the way they thought it. We all thought it was going to pan out for desktop apps. And so after about 2003, a lot of developers stopped developing things for Java. And so people had installed Java onto their computers, And then they literally just forgot about it because nothing else used Java anymore. There's just this time period where people don't use Java. And then about 2010, people started using Java again. For whatever. It's just one of those things that happens in the technology world. Anyways, what hackers realized in about 2008, what hackers realized is, hey, there are a lot of systems out there with Java from 2002 installed on them. We have the full documentation at this point of all the vulnerabilities of Java from 2002. So we're just going to hack the hell out of all these systems that have Java from 2002 because nobody ever bothered to update Java. This is one of the problems that you can run into. So if you have some kind of patch management system, it'll go through, it'll see all the software, it'll patch everything up to date, and your life will be a hell of a lot easier. And again, when we talk about patch management, it's one thing, oh, hee hee ha ha, like you think you're a month behind on patches. In the real world, many times these systems are years behind on patch. I'm not talking about upgrading to the next operating system or something. I'm just saying being up to date for the patches of whatever operating system they have. So you need to do patch management. Again, if you're doing desktop support, so any noobs out there, you're actually doing like help desk or desktop support. One of the lessons that I learned the very hard way is if somebody's computer is not acting right, the first thing that you do is you update the computer. You don't know how many times I spent hours and hours and hours troubleshooting a computer because I didn't want to go through the whole, basically I would set the updates to run automatically, but I didn't want to actually have to deal with downloading them at the time. So I'd be like, okay, I'll set up all the updates to download automatically, and then I'll troubleshoot and I'll fix the problem so that it's fixed and then I can leave. You don't know how many times I would spend 2 or 3 hours trying to troubleshoot some stupid ass problem, getting absolutely nowhere. And so finally, I would just let all the updates run because I was kind of out of options. And then as soon as the computer rebooted, the problem was fixed. I was like, oh, yeah. Patch management, big deal. Firewall. So firewalls are a big deal. Everybody thinks firewalls are like this weird panacea. It's kind of funny. Whenever you watch like NCIS or one of these weird shows that talks about technology, they're always like, they're breaking through the firewalls. Firewalls don't really work that way. Basically, you have to understand firewalls, they're basically blocking TCP ports. So TCP ports, whenever you have an IP address in 192.168.1.2, let's say, that's the IP address of the computer, and then you do colon, and then specific services live at specific ports. Web services, www, is at port 40. SSL, I think, is at port 443. SMTP has a port. SNMP has a port. FTP has a port. All the different protocols have different ports. Basically, all firewalls do is they block those ports. They keep people from accessing the computer from ports that they're not supposed to access. Normally, what you do is you close down all the ports and then you only open the specific ones that people need to access. Should be required on all your servers. So all your servers, your Active Directory server, your Linux servers, all of that kind of stuff, you should have your software firewalls set up at very minimum, so that only people on the local area network are able to access the systems. Again, something to be thinking about is if you have a web server, Linux, Ubuntu, whatever else, a web server on your internal network. Again, one of the things to be asking is why is SSH open to the entire LAN? Why is SSH open to the entire world? Anybody who can figure out a way to access SSH can try to brute force attack into the web server. Does that sound smart? Answer, no. So, something to be thinking about is like, okay, well, if I know that the administrator computers, like put all the administrator computers on a specific subnet, or give the administrator computers specific static IP addresses, right? So I know I'm going to have a couple of my administrators, and they are going to be responsible for the Linux servers. So the Linux server administrators, they will have IP addresses 192.168.1.10 to 192.168.1.20. So we're just going to say, anybody that needs to access those servers, those are going to be their static IP addresses. Then you go into your Ubuntu server, you set up the software firewall to say only people on 192.168.1.10 to 192.168.1.20 are able to access the SSH port. Again, there is still some vulnerability there. If somebody has the correct IP address, they can still try to brute force attack, but you massively minimize your plane of attack. One of the things to be thinking about is, though, for client systems, Be careful with firewalls. Firewalls can create more problems than they're worth on client systems. One of the things to think about is with servers, you should know absolutely everything going on with your server. There should be nothing on your servers that you do not understand. Every service that they're providing, all the networking that they're doing, you should understand the ports, you should understand everything going on, right? These are servers. These are things that you spin up. You basically have them run 24/7 for 3 years, whatever the hell your refresh cycle is. Then you migrate to the next thing and throw the old ones away, right? So you should know everything going on with the servers. Servers should not be changing every week or every month, right? You should have a plan for upgrades or modifications to the servers, and it should be something that everybody understands what's going on. You don't just install crap on your servers willy-nilly. And so firewalls and servers really make a lot of sense. One of the things you have to understand with client systems is not so much. I made a lot of money back in the day from Norton Internet Security Suite. I can definitively say, factually state, they made me enough money to probably buy a car. The reason is Norton Internet Security Suite back in the day was so secure, that it would lock users from being able to do things like print to their USB printers, because the USB port was considered a networking device for some reason, and since they did not know how to administer Norton, none of us really did, it was a pain in the ass to administer, many times Norton Internet Security Suite would just lock people out of lots of things, right? And so one of the problems you can have on client systems is if you put firewalls on there, you may create a lot more problems than they're worth. I think about this, one of the clients that I had, they had a previous administrator that was really into security, really into installing security, not really into understanding what the hell was going on. And so ISA was an Internet Services Acceleration Server, I think it was called. It was a horrible piece of crap. One of Microsoft's horrible piece of crap. It sounded good on paper. Anyways, it was supposed to be like this antivirus security component for Windows servers. Oh, it was so horrible. So horrible. Anyways, it blocked a lot of stupid things. And the problem is, especially with client computers, a lot of times the software that they're using does not fully document what ports are being used, right? So again, if you're using SMTP, SNMP, any of the normal networking protocols, you know what the ports are. If you're using any kind of enterprise class equipment, there should be documentation for what ports need to be opened. The problem is, for a lot of a consumer level or a lot of user level software, they just don't bother to document the ports. Yep, they use ports. And so I remember one of my clients, one of the ways they made money is not only did they have a successful business, but they also day traded. So while they're running their successful business with 100 plus employees, they would sit there, buying and selling stocks. And so basically the previous client had made their system so secure that Merrill Lynch, for whatever reason, Merrill Lynch had a web app using like ActiveX controls. And for whatever reason, that just failed out whenever they tried to get into their Merrill Lynch app. Tried to do communication with Merrill Lynch servers and failed out because ISA server was screwing with it. So literally getting rid of ISA server solved a lot of problems. So this is something to be thinking about with firewalls. Again, when you think about security, right? If you put so much security on a client's computer that they're unable to do their work, that's not a win. That's not a win. And then the other thing is when you start messing around with firewalls, make sure to allocate enough human resources to deal with problems. Firewalls are not fire and forget solutions. Again, when you start doing firewalls, when you start administering firewalls on your network and your infrastructure, what you should do is set up your firewall, set up your software firewalls, and then basically sit by the help desk and wait for the trouble tickets to come in. And then deal with all those trouble tickets. And once everything's working again, then you go to the next set of firewalls, and you go to the next set of firewalls, and you go to the next set of firewalls, right? There is always, whenever you deal with firewalls, there is always going to be unanticipated problems. And so, like with anything, you just budget the time for it. It's like, I'm going to spend an hour setting up the firewalls, and I'll spend the next 7 hours fixing all the problems that were created when I set up the firewalls. As long as you understand that's what's going to go on, you'll be fine. Antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spyware, again, even in 2021, for some stupid-ass reason, many times these are different products. But some of the things to be thinking about with this kind of stuff is it free? Some of the big problems you run into, especially with organizations, especially with businesses, is there's a lot of software out there that is presented as free. This is free. Eli, I don't want to spend $50 for Kaspersky. I want to use a free solution because I'm smart. I'm a CEO, and the way I became CEO is by not spending money on things I don't need to spend money on. Whatever. Problem is a lot of the licensing is, again, remember, as a decision maker, as an IT professional, your job is to understand licensing as much as anything else. And a lot of the licensing, what you'll notice, is that free licensing is for personal and family use only, not for business or commercial use. So I actually grabbed this as a screenshot from AVG from 2 days ago. So as of 2021, AVG is not free for business or commercial use. And so one of the things to be thinking about when you're using these antivirus solutions, and people want to use the free stuff, if you're using it for home or whatever, hey, go for it. But if you're using it for businesses, one of your responsibilities is to make sure you are using software legally and how it's supposed to be used. So do be careful of that whole free thing. Go and take a look at the license. Some of the licenses are free. Clam AV. If you want to use it. I wouldn't use it. I don't know. If you want to use Clam AV, I think that's free for whatever the hell you want to use it for. But anyways, make sure. Then when you go out there to buy antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spyware, do you realize there's a difference between retail and corporate edition? So a lot of people go out there, a lot of business people go out there, they go to Staples or Office Depot or whatever, they grab the latest Norton, box of Norton, they take it to their office and they install it on 3 computers or whatever else. If you're in a small environment, that's not a big deal, right? If you're in an environment with 5 computers or 10 computers, using retail editions of software still probably isn't the best way to go, but it's not the worst way to go either. It's just, it is as it is. One of the things to realize though is if you go with corporate editions of software, just like Active Directory, there's things like management consoles and configurations and all kinds of nice fancy stuff they give administrators to make it a hell of a lot easier to administer your security software. And so that's something to be thinking about. Again, if you have a large environment, again, any more than 10 for the most part, do some research, but basically any more than 10, you should really look at getting the corporate editions of your antivirus, your security software, because again, they give you things like management consoles, they give you ways to schedule things, they give you ways to deal with configurations for your entire infrastructure, not just for individual systems, and also from a licensing standpoint, you just get licenses for however many computers you're putting the antivirus on, right? So if you have a retail license, if your computer blue screens to death, and then you have to wipe and reload it and reinstall everything, you may have some issues with the whole activation and keys and all that kind of crap because you're dealing with a retail license. Whereas if you're dealing with a corporate edition, worst case scenario, it'll simply phone up to the vendor servers. It'll say, okay, I can see that 10 licenses are currently being used, and they bought 10 licenses, and everything just works a hell of a lot easier. One of those things to think about. Configurations and issues. One of the big things I would argue with a lot of the antivirus, anti-malware, anti-spyware software is they all have problems. They all have problems. I like beating up on Norton simply because I made so much money on Norton. I quantifiably made a crap ton of money off Norton Internet Security Suite. That's a fact. You can't sue me for facts, Norton. But the reality is all antivirus, all security software has their quirks. McAfee, again, back in the day we used McAfee. Don't look at me that way. Don't look at me. 2008, McAfee was different. Not talking about 2021 McAfee. I'm talking about 2008 McAfee. We used McAfee. McAfee had weird configuration problems. Kaspersky had weird configuration problems. Trend Micro, and all these different things, right? All antivirus, all security software. They have their quirks. They're technology products. They got their quirks. One of the things that I would recommend is basically you find one vendor of security software and you basically stick with it until there's a real reason to change. So back in the day when I had my company with my employees, all of that, we installed a crap ton of McAfee. Again, to be clear, McAfee from 13 years ago. To be clear, McAfee from the early 2000s, not whatever happened to it after Intel bought it. Which is weird. You realize that when Intel bought McAfee, McAfee got quantifiably worse. Just, you do with that as you will. Anyways, but one of the reasons is back then, every year, PC, whatever, CNET or PC News or whatever would come out with their rankings for antivirus software. And so Norton would be one of the top 3, McAfee would be one of the top 3, and then every year a new competitor would cycle through, Kaspersky, Trend Micro, whatever else. But that was the thing, McAfee was always in the top 3. Sometimes it was number 1, sometimes it was number 3, but it was always in the top 3. So by simply standardizing on McAfee, we knew we had a pretty good security software back then in the 2000s. And all my employees knew how to deal with it. They understand the quirks of the software, they understood the problems that came up, and so then they were able to troubleshoot relatively easily when those problems came up. So think about standardizing. And then also something to be thinking about when you're thinking about all this is that there's antivirus software, and there's anti-malware software, and there's anti-spyware software. So when you go to buy the software, many times you can have full security suites where they come with antivirus, spyware, firewalls, backups, the whole 9 yards, or you can buy those products individually. What you decide to do is kind of up to you. One of the things that I will say with these suites is many times vendors do something really well and a lot of other things really poorly. So you might want to mix and match, but that's your decision. Then we're talking about antiviruses. One of the systems, one of the cool things you might want to think about is an antivirus firewall. So this is a firewall from Barracuda. That's really cool. So basically what this firewall is from Barracuda is all of your network traffic goes through this. So basically you have a router and you plug the router into this, then you plug basically this into your modem or whatever. So literally all traffic coming into or out of your network is going through this Barracuda antivirus firewall. What's cool about this thing is that it's able to look at every single file going through and see if the file matches what it thinks are viruses. So email, it's able to read emails on the fly. It's able to read files on the fly. Anything that it detects as a virus, it just flushes and it logs. And so one of the nice parts here is if you forget to update antivirus on some of your systems, if some of your systems are not up to snuff as far as patch management is all that is concerned, this can be a layer of security for you to try to prevent, problems on your network. One of the things, again, things to be thinking about with cybersecurity is having a layered approach to what you're doing. You have a whole bunch of layers for security. So if any one layer of security fails, another layer should try to protect you from what's going on. I was talking with the Barracuda folks a number of years ago with this, and I thought it was actually kind of cute. Because for a while, Barracuda actually trusted their antivirus firewalls to such a degree that they didn't even have antivirus software on their computers. They trusted their Barracuda antivirus firewalls so much that they decided we're not even going to put antivirus software on our regular computers. And so they did that apparently for a while, until somebody realized that was incredibly stupid. Like, hey, what if somebody comes in with a virus on a USB stick? Fuck. So anyways, just something to think about. Somebody brought up the whole thing with SSL in the class last night, director's cut here, with the SSL. One of the interesting things is this says that it breaks SSL. Advanced features ensure that organizations adapt to emerging requirements like social network regulation, remote filtering, and visibility into SSL encrypted traffic. So one of the reasons that I bring this up, and I thought this was interesting with the conversation that I was having last night, is, I don't know, everybody's all like SSL crazy right now. You don't need a VPN, just use SSL. SSL will save us all. All I'm going to put out there, again, from the whole cybersecurity thing to be thinking about, so I've been looking at a lot of products, and I've been looking at a lot of projects that I want to do for Silicon Dojo in the future, and I just, this whole concept of visibility into SSL encrypted traffic, this has actually come up a number of places. Again, I can't do a class on it quite yet. But I'm not quite sure SSL is nearly as secure as people think it is. There's some stuff with like caching servers. So again, I'm really interested in caching servers. So caching servers is where you store, basically if somebody goes out and downloads something like a Windows update, when another client on the network needs a Windows update, instead of going all the way out to Microsoft, it can just pull it from the cache server. There's some interesting stuff with basically cache servers breaking SSL. And all I'm gonna say with this is, again, it's like, I haven't done enough research. I've been busy with other things, with breaking SSL. I'm just gonna point out, I don't think SSL is as secure as people think it is. I was just saying. Anyways, want to be careful with that. But anyways. Servers. Let's talk about servers for a little bit. One of the big things with servers, one of the things I love is Active Directory. Active Directory is absolutely awesome to me. A lot of people out there are like, blockchain! As excited as so many people are about blockchain and cryptocurrency, that's how excited I am about Active Directory. That's the kind of cool kid I am. Active Directory is absolutely amazing, especially in enterprise type environments. Basically, it's a centralized account and permission management system, and it's well worth the money that you're going to spend with Microsoft. A lot of folks out there have a little hissy fit. It's going to cost anywhere between $600 to $1,000 per Active Directory server, plus about a $50 per CAL, client access license, so every computer that's going to be accessing that Active Directory server. But this gives you one centralized place to deal with your permissions, to deal with your security, to deal with your users, to deal with your groups. It has so much functionality to it. It is absolutely and utterly amazing. If you have just individual systems running around in your network, you really may want to think about upgrading to Active Directory. Not only that, with Windows systems, Windows gives you everything including the kitchen sink with their servers. So if you need VPN services, routing and remote access is built into Active Directory servers, and so your VPN services have Active Directory already built into them. Print services, file services, all kinds of network NIC teaming and all kinds of amazing stuff are built into to Microsoft servers. So this is something to think about. I know a lot of the younger folks out there think Microsoft is like old. That's what those old people use. And look, I'll credit where credit's due. Yes, Outlook is old. We have moved beyond Outlook. I will admit to that. Outlook was like the iPhone for my era. It was absolutely amazing. ActiveSync was great. I get it, Outlook and Exchange servers are no longer the cool thing. But I will tell you, Microsoft does a lot of really good products. Active Directory is one of them, and something you should be thinking about for your network. If you do have a small network though, one of the things you might think about is more server type devices. So I have Synology here, QNAP, Drobo. I actually have experience with all of these types of NAS type devices. And so with these NASs, they're called network attached storage. And so for a long time, all they were was storage. Basically just file servers, right? Easy file servers you could put on the network. Time has moved on, 2021 at this point. And so these file servers actually have a hell of a lot more capability than they used to have. They have full-fledged web servers on them. They can have database servers on them. They actually have their own app stores, just like your iPhone has an app store, like QNAP and some of these things. They actually have their own app store, so you can install MongoDB and all kinds of wacky things. One of the things you might think about is if you have a small environment, or if your environment really doesn't do a hell of a lot, maybe you just have Macs. Maybe you don't want Active Directory, you just have Macs. You might think about doing one of these server devices. From a security standpoint, they have a lot of security built into them. They even have things like high availability. So Synology, the two Synology NAS units I have high availability. What that means is you have them both up and running. If one of them fails, the other one takes over being the active server, and your users don't even realize anything occurred, right? So if a power supply fails, a hard drive fails, something like that, the entire box takes over responsibility, and users just keep doing whatever that is that they're doing. Drobo is kind of cool. It has something called Beyond RAID. So let's say you have a file server, you're storing files, and at first all you need something like 8 terabytes of storage, so you throw in, 8 1 terabyte drives. As time goes by, you need more and more storage. The nice thing with Beyond RAID is you simply literally just pull out a hard drive. You pull out a 1 terabyte hard drive and you shove in a 16 terabyte hard drive, and Beyond RAID does all the auto configuration. It'll take a long time because it's 16 terabytes. It'll put that into the Beyond RAID array, and then you will now have all of that new storage. So if you need a device in order to upgrade storage as you go, Drobo might be one of the ways to go. QNAP. So again, this was one of the big things. So people asked me in the class last night, they're like, well, which one do you prefer? I'm like, oh, you're not going to do that one to me. And I own Drobo. And for storage solutions, I think Drobo is the best. Performance, you don't always get the best out of Drobo, but just for pure storage, Drobo is great. Synology, I like Synology. Again, have Synology too. High availability is absolutely awesome. Probably out of all of these, I would actually go with Synology realistically at the end of the day. QNAP? Yeah, QNAP. Yeah, so basically QNAP user interfaces are basically designed by Linux administrators that barely know English. Here's the problem with QNAP. QNAP is actually a very good product once you figure out how the hell to use them. The way that I explain it is QNAP actually sent me this really cool device. I was so excited to get this device, right? So basically this device, what it is it has 16 16 PoE ports. It has a full-fledged server built into it, so you can like do virtualization. You can build your own server. The whole nine is built into the device, and then it has its own QoS or whatever the hell it's called with its own functionality, right? So basically you get this one box that has power over Ethernet, it has the ability to create your own server, plus it has, the QoS and all the functionality that comes with that. Like, what could be the problem there? Here's the thing. They basically digitally duct taped everything together. So every single one of those components has its own login screen. Oh, you need to get into the switch? That has its login screen. Oh, you need to get into QoS or whatever the hell it's called? That has its login screen. Oh, you want to get in the server component? That has its login screen. It is so duct taped together that if you want to access like the server from a network device that's plugged in the PoE switch, you literally have to plug a port from the PoE switch into the port on the server that's literally physically sitting on the exact same box. And so that's the problem with QNAP. It's not that QNAP is bad. Oh, the user interface design is horrible. You almost wonder if you're getting punked. Like when you sit there and you start to try to configure for QNAP, you're waiting for like Ashton Kutcher to like pop out. Punked! Like, it should not be this difficult. Ashton Kutcher pops out. Got ya! So anyways, one of the big things when you're thinking about cybersecurity is resiliency and basically uptime for all of your systems. A very important thing to be thinking about is high availability. If you don't have high availability built into your infrastructure right now, you should definitely have it. Basically, the idea with high availability is that you have virtual machines, generally virtual machines, that are running on different pieces of hardware. If one piece of hardware fails, all the virtual machines migrate over to a different piece of hardware and everything keeps running and the users don't even realize what's going on. You can do this with Hyper-V, you can use this with VMware, Synology actually has this, lots and lots of companies have high availability, and basically the idea here is that the entire physical machine can fail. A crackhead and steal the entire physical machine. And the other physical machine will just keep on running right along, giving all the services to the end users. Again, a big thing to be thinking about back in the old days was not losing data. Like the thing we used to worry about was losing data. Right, that was the primary concern we had. Nowadays, the primary concern is keeping the data available, keeping the services available for your users at all times. If you have data that's somehow stored in a hard drive and stored in a tape drive or something like that, even though you have the data, it's not accessible, it's not usable to your end users, and for them, for that period of time, it's actually worthless. If you have something like high availability, the entire machine fails, everything flips over to the new machines, you can keep trotting along. Basically now you can figure out how to fix this physical machine. You can sit there with a cup of coffee, you can sit there, you can do your Google searches, you can figure out what vendors are selling the parts you need at the right price. You can wait, 7 days for them to ship you the part for economy rate shipping, and it's all okay because all your systems are running fine, right? Your users don't know the difference, which is a hell of a lot different than if, your system fails, you have the backup, but now you have to physically fix that system in order to restore the backup onto the system, and all the time and energy that's going to take. Along the same ends, again, as I would say back in 2000, we were very worried about backups, tape backups, all that kind of stuff. In the modern world, I would argue disaster recovery is where we need to be thinking about. And with disaster recovery scenarios, the idea is how can we get usable systems up and running as fast as possible. This is with Veeam. So Veeam, I like Veeam. Veeam is a very good product, I think. And it's definitely something that you should be looking at for your infrastructure. And what's cool with Veeam, Veeam is basically a backup solution. It backs up from VMware, Hyper-V, whatever the hell Nutanix is, Windows Server, Linux, NAS is the whole 9 yards. But the cool part is that it backs up into a virtual machine. So when it backs up, it gives you a virtual machine that you can spin up just like any other virtual machine. And that's not the coolest part about it. The coolest part about it, though, is that Veeam has third-party partners that basically they provide disaster recovery as a service. And so you can back up as a virtual machine to these cloud providers. If a wildfire comes through and melts down your entire server room, you can spin up the virtual machines within their environments, start providing services to all your users, all your customers, the whole 9 yards. All your systems are running, providing services, blah, 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 and you now can figure out how to rebuild your server room at your own leisure. Of course, when you spin up all these servers up in the cloud, it's going to cost you a couple of dollars. This is not necessarily something that you want running for a year or whatever, but again, all of your systems literally get melted. You come in, you spin up the virtualized instances that were backed up to the cloud, you spin them up, you make sure that they're communicating properly, you change a little routing or whatever else, and within an hour of your infrastructure literally melting, your infrastructure is now working up in the cloud, doing what it needs to do. Disaster recovery scenarios is the big thing for the modern world. Then we go to networks. A big thing to be thinking about with cybersecurity is layered networks. So we did something about 15 years ago that we realized was a stupid idea. So there is something called convergence. You may have heard of convergence. They've stopped talking about it quite so much as they used to. The idea with convergence is back in the day, computers and telephone systems and access control systems and surveillance systems and the whole nine yards use entirely different ways of communicating. So computers use Cat5 cable and TCP/IP. Telephone systems use Cat3 cable and digital communications. Surveillance systems used basically coax cable and analog communication, right? So basically, although these may be computerized devices, they may have programming and all that kind of stuff in it, how the communication was done, the media that was actually being used, all of that was entirely different. So, 15 or so years ago, VoIP became prominent. People started creating IP surveillance cameras, the whole nine yards, and folks realized, hey, if we're going to wire up a facility, it's a lot less expensive to wire up a facility with the exact same type of wiring and equipment versus all of these different types of equipment. So let's just have what's called a converged infrastructure. So let's have our voice over IP phones and our computers and our surveillance cameras and everything running on the exact same network. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Yeah, that was great. That was great until people started misconfiguring their surveillance cameras. So, again, 15 years ago, most of us were on 10/100 switches at that point. Gigabit switches were not something that was really standard at that point in time. But we did have surveillance cameras that could pump out a lot of data. So 1080p cameras or even higher megapixel cameras, 12 megapixel cameras. Some of these cameras would pump out 10 megabits per second, maybe 20 megabits per second. And so when you have cameras that are able to capture in very high resolution, and you have networks that are only 100 megabits per second, one of the things that you do is you push what's called intelligence to the edge. So with these new computerized cameras, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to go in and you do the configurations so that the camera will only send back high resolution video when it's necessary. If you see motion between these two time periods, send back video. If you see motion within this sector of an image, actually send back video to be stored, right? You're supposed to do all these configurations. Well, surprise. You send out a junior level sysadmin to set up all these cameras within your facility because, hey, you don't want to do it. You're a senior level admin. And you give them the configurations that they're supposed to use in order to set up all these cameras. And the junior admin doesn't do what they're supposed to do. They forget to hit the apply button at some point. So these cameras, instead of sending video only when they're supposed to send video, which will be fine for the entire network, you now have 16 or 32 cameras all sending high-def video back to their NVR network video recorder all at the exact same time, and basically the network comes to a halt because all the bandwidth is being used for streaming these video files back to the video server. So what we realized back then is having a fully converged infrastructure was just stupid. It was just stupid. No. So what we started doing is start building what we call parallel networks. So with these networks, they still use TCP/IP, they still use Ethernet, they still use switches, they still use routers, the whole nine yards. But the idea is, okay, we're going to have a VoIP network. We're going to have a surveillance camera network. We're going to have our normal PC network and our access control network and all that. Basically, down at the bottom, they're all going to be connected with routers so that if somebody needs to access one of the networks, from something else, they'll be able to do it. But otherwise, they're segregated. If your surveillance cameras start using all the bandwidth on their switches, that just brings down the surveillance cameras. It doesn't bring down everything else, right? One of the things I'd argue in the modern world to be thinking about is to start taking this concept of parallel networks or layered networks to a much larger degree, right? Remember, if an attacker is able to get into your network, they are able to attack anything that they can see. Well, here's the thing. If an attacker gets into your network and they can see 1,000 targets, that means they can attack 1,000 targets. And if you've got 1,000 targets, most likely some of those targets haven't fully been updated, some of those targets have default usernames and passwords, the whole 9 yards, your whole system can get compromised relatively quickly. So something to be thinking about is segregating off your different systems. Again, your voice over IP, your telephone systems. Put them into their own network, their own subnet, their own network, have a router, have a firewall. Your computers, again, put them into your own network, have a router, have a firewall. Computers on different floors of your office. Why should a computer on the 3rd floor of your office be able to see a computer on the 5th floor of your office? Remember, you're sharing files through a file server. Individual computers don't necessarily need to see each other, so why can they see each other? Segregate those off so they can't. So if somebody's able to compromise a computer on the 3rd floor of the office, they can only attack the computers that are on the 3rd floor of the office. Again, the surveillance cameras. When you think about your web servers, a big thing to be thinking about is, again, like why can somebody access the root directory over the network of your database server? MS SQL, MySQL, MariaDB, MongoDB, whatever it is. One of the reasons these ransomware attacks happen is when you think about permissions, you think about the privileges on the database itself. What is a user on the database able to do? Are they able to create tables, delete tables, add things, whatever else? One of the things they don't think about is, what if an account just simply has access to the root folder that the database is stored in, and they just encrypt the root folder? That's what's happening with a lot of these ransomware attacks. And so one of the things to be thinking about is why can somebody access through SMB? SMB is a server message block. It's the protocol that's used in the Windows world to do file transfers and all that. Why is somebody able to access the root directory using SMB of a database server on the network? That sounds what I would call stupid. So you set up a firewall system, you have a layered network, so your database servers are within this layer, it is separated by a router, by a firewall, and the outside world is only able to communicate with those database servers on the specific ports that you say that they're allowed to communicate on, and only to the appropriate clients. Again, let's say you have web servers, right? So you have a web application, you have your web servers, Apache, Nginx, IIS, whatever you're using, and you have the database servers over here. So one of the things you can say is, okay, the database servers can only be communicated with by the web servers on these specific ports. And then they're completely segregated off. So even if the system administrator down here, their account is hacked while they're logged in as a system administrator, if they're not able to actually access with their computer the database servers at a time, those database servers are going to be protected. So something to be thinking about is how can you layer your network so that it's all defended against. Again, when you go back 15 years, doing this kind of thing was expensive. Gigabit switches were expensive, routers were expensive, firewalls were expensive, everything was freaking expensive. Here's that thing, that whole, naked in the dawn of a new age. Technology is not that expensive anymore. This is $10. This is a full-fledged computer. It's a Raspberry Pi. 1 gigahertz, 512 megs of RAM. You can put up to a terabyte of storage in this thing. Got a full Wi-Fi stack. That's $10. Equipment is not that expensive anymore. Routers are not that expensive anymore. Switches are not that expensive anymore. Creating very spread out or whatever, layered networks at this point, it's not actually that expensive from a hardware standpoint. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes caring to do it, but actually getting the budget to do it shouldn't be that difficult. So one of the things to be thinking about. One of the other things to be considering here is VPNs are not magic. So again, with that whole moving to the remote worker architecture, VPNs will save us. Again, a lot of folks administrators from 2005, they really like their VPNs. Here's the thing about VPNs. What does VPN do? Virtual Private Network. It makes the computer that you're in front of, and wherever you're at, logically appear to be within the local network. So if I am in Shanghai, if I am in Houston or wherever else, I connect with my VPN, I am able to access the internal network of my organization, and I'm able to see all of the servers, all of the resources that are on offer. I can see the Exchange server, I can see the TeamSpeak server, I can see the Active Directory server, all that kind of stuff is there. And so here's the thing. If this person's computer is compromised, because, it's late at night, they have jet lag, they've had a couple too many beers, they can't go to sleep, they decide to use their computer for things that they're not supposed to use their computer for, and they get it infected, like they do. Well, when they wake up in the morning with that hangover, and they connect and turn into the internal VPN, whatever their computer has been infected with, that can now see the entire internal network. Does that make sense? No, not in 2021. So again, we talk about these layer networks. This is the kind of stuff to think about. The other thing to be thinking about is, okay, so we say, well, we're going to use private VPN services, right? So we're worried about Wi-Fi. We're worried about if we access the internet using the Wi-Fi at the hotel or Wi-Fi at coffee shops or whatever else, so we're going to use a VPN service, TunnelBear or whatever else. Don't get me wrong with TunnelBear. I just grabbed TunnelBear. I actually like TunnelBear. But one of the things is there's this idea that VPN services, again, they're magic. Eli, VPN services protect your network traffic. Haven't you heard all the YouTubers tell you that? Surfshark is amazing. Look, I like Midnight's Edge. I like Midnight's Edge just like everybody else likes Midnight's Edge. The Surfshark advertisements are getting ridiculous. Here's the thing. Nothing is magical here. Nothing is magical. One of the things to be considering, so if your user uses one of these public VPN services, Surfshark, NordVPN, TunnelBear, I'm not beating up on any particular company. One of the things you have to realize is you don't understand what their infrastructure looks like. This is basically an intentional man-in-the-middle attack. All of your traffic is now going through their servers, and you are trusting that it's secure in the ways that it's supposed to be. Realize, there could be something right on the other side of their servers harvesting all of your information, and you have no idea what it is. Again, this is very important to be thinking about. If you have regulatory compliance, PCI compliance, HIPAA compliance, some kind of security compliance they have to deal with the government, this could become a big issue. Literally the final slide that I'll show you today. There was a Ukrainian VPN service that forgot to encrypt their traffic. Yeah, no lie. Apparently the Ukrainian police were able to access the internal infrastructure and grab a whole bunch of VPN traffic because they didn't know how to administer their own VPN service. TunnelBear is not magic, so it's one of those things to be thinking about from a security standpoint, how much you trust this. Again, that's where you think about, like with VPN infrastructure, is if maybe your users are going to need a VPN service, you set up a Windows routing and remote access server in your infrastructure, but you have it basically segregated into its own little world so that people can then only bounce out to the internet. So I connect to my company's routing and remote access, Windows routing and remote access server, and then from that server, I'm then able to connect to Salesforce. Right? So therefore I have the VPN security because I'm connecting to our server, and then hopefully I have the peace of mind of at least imagining that my server room is secure so that when the traffic bounces out to the internet, it's a little bit more secure. These are some of the things that you really need to be thinking about. Beyond that, DNS. DNS is an incredibly valuable tool for cybersecurity. I have a whole class, DNS for cybersecurity. I did before, like 2 hours talking about this crap. But there's a lot of stuff with DNS. Pie holes are really useful. So one of the big problems right now with hackers, not really with hackers, it's really with these ad management companies. So one of the things I've actually run into is where hackers try to install viruses or malware or whatever onto your computer, literally through ads on a web page, right? You go to a web page, and that web page is actually made up of many different web pages. All those banner ads are more or less their own individual web page, and if they're their own individual web page, they're able to try to fire off scripts within your browser. and cause all kinds of havoc, right? And so with banner ads, not only are they just annoying and take up resources, but they can also be vectors for attack. So if you have something like a pie hole, so what a pie hole does is a DNS server that actually has a lot of blacklists, basically has a blacklist for a lot of these advertising companies and all that kind of thing. So when DNS tries to resolve to these advertising companies, it kills that connection, so it's not able to resolve. So pie holes can be very useful. Open DNS, again, if you're worried about your users going to inappropriate sites. There's a lot of reasons in the modern world you should be worried about your users going to inappropriate sites, not just from a cybersecurity standpoint, like a standard cybersecurity standpoint, but we're in the Me Too era. And again, not to be snarky on that or anything, right? Like what happens if your employees are going to porn sites on the clock? Have I told you how I feel about employees? I can't wait till I'm successful enough to have employees. Oh, employees. Anyways, OpenDNS is a service. They have free services. They have enterprise class services. What's really cool is you can use them. You can actually configure what should be allowed and what should not be allowed to be resolved using DNS. And so you can have it so it'll only try to filter out malicious DNS, going back to malware or advertising or that kind of thing. Or you can have it filter out everything, including Facebook and sex sites and the whole 9 yards. So basically you can use OpenDNS as a security component. So any time a computer on the network tries to resolve to one of these sites, it just crab cans it. And then one of the things to be thinking about on your internal network, normally if you have an Active Directory network, you'll have this, is reverse DNS. So one of the problems you can have on your network is spoofing. So basically the idea is a server pretends to be a server that it's not. So if you can somehow convince one of your local computers that the IP address of a server is a different IP address than it should be, then all of your traffic may go to the wrong IP address, right? So imagine you have an internal website for some reason, and there's login credentials there. If somebody's able to access your internal network, screw around with, like maybe the host file setting or something like that, one of the problems you can have is instead of going to the server that your clients are supposed to go to, they'll get redirected to this hack server, and then it might try to harvest credentials. One of the cool things you can do is reverse DNS. So normal DNS resolves a host name or a fully qualified domain name to an IP address. So that's one way. What reverse DNS does is it then resolves an IP address to that host name, fully qualified domain name. So basically it goes through and it says, okay, I need the IP address for server. It'll give 192.168.1.10. And then I'll say, okay, I've got 192.168.1.10. I want to resolve to what that host name should be. And then it might be something entirely different. And so if that fails out, then the communication will fail out. So one of the things you should take a look at with DNS, especially on the internal network, is something called reverse DNS. Past this, here's something really cool. And again, I think this is really awesome, coming back from my military or whatever experience. Again, when I look at an infrastructure, I own the infrastructure. It's my bias. It's how I think about things. One of the really cool things is products from this company called Live Action. So I actually have an interview from one of the engineers, a company called Savius. Savius was purchased by Live Action. And what Live Action allows you to do is you're able to access real-time and historical forensic analysis. So this is packet capture software and hardware that can just ingest everything. Somebody asked, what's the difference between Live Action and Wireshark? And it's basically the hardware. This stuff can ingest in like a 100 gig network. Everything that goes through the network, this thing can ingest. And so basically what it does is all the data going through the network, it stores that onto its storage arrays. And then what's really cool is if you have a problem in your network or if you're running into issues, you can go back and historically literally see what happened on the network, who did what, and how an event transpired, right? So if you have a server where a ransomware attack happened, right? So this server got encrypted by ransomware. What you could literally do is you could go back to the moment that server was encrypted by ransomware. You could then see all the communication to that server, the commands and everything else. You could then track back to the host system that communicated to do the encryption. You could then see basically what that system was communicating and how things were done. You can see what websites it went to. You could actually see it pull down the ransomware virus or whatever else. And that way you can actually go through and track all of the events that occurred for the problem to happen. And so this is something that you might think about, again, if you've got large infrastructure and you're concerned about it. Is what's really cool here is you can go and you can see exactly what is occurring. And so, especially for small problems, right? A lot of times you have small problems on your network before you have the big problem. Before your database server gets ransomware. Before that, you probably have a lot of other weird, stupid things going on, but you may not realize what's occurring. You may not realize one of the sysadmins is doing stupid things on the internet, logged into their computer as a global domain admin, and so when they're messing around looking at whatever sites they're looking at, all of a sudden they're downloading these viruses and their malware, and that's going out and it's causing small problems. Well, right now it's causing small problems. If you can backtrack and figure out why those small problems are occurring, then you might be able to prevent the larger issue from happening. One of the big issues, one of the big things to be thinking about when you're dealing with your internal infrastructure is to disconnect unused network ports. Again, a lot of people don't want to do this. This is dirty, tedious work. So whenever you're dealing with a switch, right? Whenever you're dealing with a switch, each port in your switch is going to probably cost about $50. So if you have a 24-port switch, I don't know, it's going to cost you $600 or $700. If you have a 48-port switch, it's twice as much as that. 100-port switch, twice as much as that. The whole 9 yards. Here's the thing. When you go into a facility and you see all those little network ports on the walls, so you go into an office and there's all those little different panels with network ports, you don't want every one of those ports to actually be active because most of the time they're not used, right? You walk into an office, that office may have 8 network ports, but only a computer plugged into one of them. Right? So you don't want to have 7 additional ports on a switch connected to those wall outlets because they're just never going to be used. So what happens is basically you have the ports on the wall, and then as you need them to be used, you connect the patch panel that corresponds to the port on the wall to the switch, and then that now becomes active. One of the problems, especially with old infrastructure, is people move their offices around. People move computers around. People come, people go. Printers come, printers go. And so ports on the wall are connected, and then the administrators never bother to disconnect them. Again, a big issue that you can run into with a $10 computer or a computer like this is if a nefarious individual can come into your environment, they can get a device. So this is a Zultech. I'll shout out Zultech, they make good things. This is a full-fledged computer. This is a full Windows 10 computer. Got networking, the whole 9 yards. Anyways, imagine a nefarious actor comes into your environment. They put a Verizon sticker on this, or a Quest sticker, or AT&T, whatever ISP is in your local area. They put that sticker on this. They walk up to a port. They plug this thing in. They see that the lights are blinking, and so they suction cup this to the wall, or they put it in a very officious-looking manner, and then they walk the hell out. They were now able to connect to the internal network. They were now able to connect a device to the internal network. And now this device is going to sit there doing whatever the hell the nefarious person wants it to do, basically forever, to be honest with you. And that can be a big problem. And the reason they're able to do that is that ports that should be disconnected back at the patch panel are still connected. So that's a big thing. Again, it's just one of those things you just got to go through and do some cleanup every once in a while. Let's look at some TCP/IP based solutions. One of the things that I find interesting in the modern world, especially with web applications, is why so many of these things allow me to access the applications from China. Again, we look at a lot of hacking events. I don't understand why they occur, right? Hey, look, your Twitter account was hacked by somebody in the Philippines. Well, here's the thing. IP addresses, so this is an API. There's something called ipgeolocation.com. They've got a free API. Anyway, with basically a very simple API call, you can get the geolocation of IP addresses. So you plug in an IP address, it tells you it's in Asheville, North Carolina, United States, the whole 9 yards, right? So if I'm an American user, I'm in the US, I've never been to the Philippines. Here's an interesting question. Why is somebody able to access your systems from the Philippines? If you are a local company in North Carolina, I can see you saying, okay, everybody in North Carolina should be able to access these systems, but why are people in Texas accessing these systems? Why are people in Mexico being able to access these systems? Why are people in France being able to access these systems? If somebody tries to connect to your server, You have an API call that sees where that communication is coming from, and it's not where you want it to come from, and you just crap can it. You just kill the connection. Then you don't have to worry about the brute force attack. If your systems refuse to allow the connection from a user in France or Philippines or the China, then your systems can't be brute force attacked. And so this is something to consider. Again, this kind of technology has been around for well over a decade at this point. Very robust, very useful, very inexpensive. And so one of those things to be thinking about. This can be built in, or they can be added to normal servers, Windows servers, Linux servers, the whole 9 yards. IP-ban, so I used IP-ban a number of years ago. I think I actually did a video on IP-ban a number of years ago. I haven't used it for a while. But basically, using that exact same technology, you're able to do things like ban countries. So country block list, easily block out entire countries. List is updated daily automatically. Again, if you're worried about the Chinese hackers, how about not allowing people from China to access your systems? Just saying. Just saying. Anywho, you got all kinds of stuff in here, so you can add IP addresses, you can block entire countries, you can block regions, all kinds of different stuff here. So again, one of those types of things to be thinking about with your things. Fail to ban, so fail to ban is actually can be used for Apache, might actually be able to be used for Nginx too. So if you have a web application, again, things like WordPress or some kind of custom web application that your people are using. Basically what this does is it bans IPs that show malicious signs, too many password failures, seeking for exploits, etc. Basically what fail to ban does is it ties directly into the firewall on your Linux machine. And so if an IP address does something stupid too many times, it simply blocks within the software firewall and the connections drop. Again, somebody tries to log in to the same account 10 times, fails out 10 times, just kill that IP address. Right? The security stuff really isn't that complicated, I swear. Cloudflare, I bring this up. I don't know how I feel about Cloudflare. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that. Cloudflare is amazing. I don't know. So Cloudflare is supposed to protect your web applications and all that kind of stuff from DDoS attacks. So DDoS attacks are distributed denial of service attacks. So bots basically try to attack your web applications for whatever reason. Cloudflare is supposed to provide robust solutions to keep your websites up. It doesn't work that well. Right, so malicious attacks, bots, DDoS, basically using Cloudflare. Cloudflare is a content delivery network. They have this whole thing where if you use Cloudflare, it's supposed to make your web applications ever so more robust. That's what they say. Every time I've used Cloudflare, it's made my web applications less stable. And not only that, like when I go to many sites that use Cloudflare, those sites seem a lot less stable. So Cloudflare is one of those things I'd be very careful about. Again, whenever you look at using a piece of security software, there's the pros and the cons, right? So if you have a website that is getting hammered, then using Cloudflare makes a lot of sense, right? Maybe you have a political website, maybe you have a religious website, maybe whatever. You're getting hammered by DDoS attacks, using Cloudflare may protect your system, right? So any problems that Cloudflare may present, those are not as bad as the problems that you started with. The issue that I see is if you have a site that's not getting hit the high hell and back by bots and DDoS, Cloudflare seems to me, my opinion, don't sue me, seems to cause more problems than it's worth. That's my opinion. Something to think about. SSL. So SSL is big, especially now that more and more companies are basically creating their own web applications. So either internal web applications or whatever else, they're hiring coders to go out and build custom solutions for their company. Basically what SSL is, secure socket layer, and what it's supposed to do? Well, what it does, let me be clear, what it does is it secures, or it encrypts the traffic from your web browser to the web server that you're communicating with. So when you're communicating, all of that traffic is supposed to be encrypted. This can be valuable, especially in the modern world with like web applications. So if you're communicating with internal web apps, one of the problems is a lot of times for internal web apps, people don't set up things like SSL because they consider it internal. So all the traffic in your internal network may not necessarily be encrypted. And so if somebody's able to put a device in your internal network and sniff all the traffic we're going by, it's amazing the amount of data that they can get. So using SSL for even internal web apps, the whole 9 yards, makes a lot of sense. Let's Encrypt is actually a free SSL certificate system. Every so many days, I think it's 90 days or 30 days, something like that. Basically, it has an auto-renew feature. So with SSL, you get a certificate. So basically, this certificate basically means you're the official whatever else. It allows for the encryption, allows for the decryption. One of the problems you can run into is if a nefarious actor is able to get a hold of that certificate, they can decrypt and they can cause problems for you. One of the big things is these certificates, SSL certificates, should be renewed periodically. So if you go out and buy an SSL certificate, GoDaddy, 1&1, whoever else, Vera, whatever. Basically, with that, you can renew your SSL certificate basically whenever you want. The issue is a lot of people don't, right? They get their SSL certificate and then they use the same SSL certificate for 5 years. Problem is, if that SSL certificate is compromised somehow, a year into it, then that's 4 years of people being able to read traffic and do stupid things with that SSL certificate. The nice thing about Let's Encrypt is even if your SSL certificate is compromised, periodically it auto updates the SSL certificate, so the old SSL certificate gets retired, your systems have a new SSL certificate, so therefore basically everything should be secure again. So that's one of the benefits of Let's Encrypt in SSL. So final thoughts. Whew, thank golly. It is hard to do these classes back after. I did this whole class last night, and I wake up in the morning and do this whole class again. I am really going to enjoy my beer tonight when I go get my beer. Anyways, so some final thoughts. Auditing and pen testing. So a lot of times in the modern world, when we talk about cybersecurity, we have everybody wanting to run out and get to become, certified pen testers. One of the things that I would say for a lot of companies, for a lot of organizations, one of the first things that you should do is basically you should do your own auditing and your own pen testing, which basically means poke your own system. You know what your systems are supposed to do. You know what your systems are not supposed to do. So every once in a while, just grab a cup of coffee and on your downtime, see if you can do things that you're not supposed to do on your systems. That's the thing, right? If you hire a pen tester, the pen tester doesn't necessarily know your infrastructure, doesn't necessarily understand everything that's going on. And so, realistically, might actually miss vulnerabilities in your network simply because this is not their normal job. They pen test this company, then they pen test this company, then they pen test this company. They're not with your company for 8 years. They don't know all the systems. They don't know all the weird things. And so one of the things is if you just sit there and you poke and prod, you spend 15 minutes every other day and you poke and prod your network, you might be surprised at all the problems that you find. One of the big things that I would say is scan your networks for orphan devices. Again, Nmap, whatever, SolarWinds, whatever network scanning software that you want to use. One of the big problems is a lot of times on networks, there are devices that are just forgotten about. Sometimes there are servers that are just forgotten about, right? I remember walking into a server room, and they're like, okay, this is the Active Directory server, and this is the Exchange server, and they had actually an antivirus server. It was a Norton antivirus server for some reason. And there are 3 other servers that were running. These servers were still running, they were still active, something was occurring. The little hard drive was going pop, 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 pop. They had no idea what those servers were. Somebody had turned them on years and years before, and they just kept doing whatever the hell they were doing. That's a problem. Many networks have a lot of orphan devices on them that all you need to do is go out and unplug them. Again, old HP JetDirect print servers. I bet $5 one of you people, if you go out and you actually take a look at your network, you're going to find some dusty, grody, disgusting ass HP JetDirect print server that still is blinking away, even though no printer has been connected to it for the past 15 years. Right? Going out and just doing that basic type of work. Schedule cleanup days. Nobody likes to do cleanup. Everybody needs to do cleanup. Schedule days to go out. Actually audit all of the ports on the wall. Make sure that they're no longer active. Actually go out, audit all the user accounts. Make sure, a user account, actually maps to a bud and a seat. Actually go out and do this type of work. Just schedule a day. Every week, every month, we're going to have 1 day of cleanup day. And before you say anything, I don't care. Every infrastructure needs a day a month to clean up. Even if it's just going through and just making sure, again, you go into like a network closet, making sure all the wiring is where it should be, right? If I come into a network closet and I'm trying to do troubleshooting and I pull the wrong cable, that can cause problems. A lot of reasons people pull the wrong cable is because it's a rat nest of cable and they think they're tracing the right cable to pull it out of the switch, and really they just pulled out the Active Directory cable, right? All this work needs to be done. Like I say, poke and prod your own systems. One of the next things to be thinking about is who's using your company computer. You know, Cartman from the days of World of Warcraft. It's kind of funny thing, you know, that's like a 10-year-old. No, that episode might be over 10 years old at this point. But anyways, one of the big things to be thinking about in the modern world is you give this fancy computer to your employee, and you have enough problems. You have enough problems trying to keep your employee from installing Napster on the darn thing. What happens when the employee's kid starts doing whatever the employee's kid? Like, you think about how bad it is with whatever the employee is doing with the company computer? Have you thought about what the employee's kid is doing with the company computer? All kinds of bad stuff. Not only that, like that kid might want to be a wannabe hacker or a wannabe cybersecurity expert. Daddy, I'm going to prove to you how smart I am. I'm going to show you how vulnerable your company computer is. All of a sudden, your employee's kid is trying to do unauthorized penetration testing on your network, and fun can ensue. So one of the things to be thinking about is, again, who is actually using the company's computer, especially, again, when people are now working from home. So you have kids that might want to use the computer. You have spouses that may want to use the computer. People that you, no way in hell do you want them touching the system. And all of a sudden, you now have different threat vectors from these different users of the system. And so one of the questions to be asking yourself is, how can you try to prevent that type of thing? Like, one of the things that you might want to do is, they're like e-biometric systems. So there's an idea of continuous authentication. And with this, as you log in, so you normally log in. You log in with a password, you log in with a fingerprint, whatever else. So normally when you do that and then you were logged in for the entire session. There's additional software you can add to computers to continuously authenticate the user. So basically with the webcam, you can have the webcam every 2 minutes take a picture and verify that the face in front of the webcam is the face that's supposed to be in front of the webcam. If the face in front of the webcam is a 16-year-old versus your 40-year-old employee, you just log the entire damn thing off and say this has been this event has been sent to the local administrator, right? Something to really be considering there. The next thing to be thinking about, and this is where I might get some hate in the Asheville area. Whenever I do these slides, I realize why my wife might be right sometimes. Every once in a while, my wife looks at me and goes, "You know, Eli, there might be a reason people get irritated at you." I'm like, but I'm just making a point. I am just making a valid point. Oh, but anyways. One of the things you might be thinking about, want to consider for your company, for your organization, is employee internet visibility. Again, when we think about hacking attacks, when we think about hacks against companies, a lot of these hacks can be worth a hell of a lot of money. They might be worth money. They would be worth intelligence information to nation-state actors, that type of thing. And so one of the questions you have to ask is, do you want your employees publicly announcing a whole bunch of information about what they're doing with your company? Again, one of the things that I find really funny in the world is how we like to laugh at people that are dissimilar to us, but don't realize how we do the same type of thing, right? So that's one of the big things in like law enforcement and criminal justice, and one of the big things with civil rights is, so there are a lot of criminals that get out on parole and probation, and part of the rules with parole and probation is you can't be around drugs, and you can't be around guns, and you can't be around a lot of that kind of stuff. And so you have parole and probation officers that simply look at the social media accounts of the people that are on parole and probation, and it's shocking how many times, a couple of days after they get out on parole and probation, you have some thug sitting there with 2 Glocks with a weed plant in the background. And everybody likes to laugh about how stupid those thugs are, right? Why are you publishing that to the world? I have a question. Why are you publishing all this to the world? What? No, that Eli, but that's a thug. That's a thug. We laugh at thugs. What I am doing is professional, right? So I just did some Google searches because, again, I just think about this with compromising people. Again, a human intelligence, social engineering, actually trying to attack people. Again, on the long term, when we talk about doing social engineering, a lot of people think about it, a single phone call. If I'm going to do social engineering, it's not going to be a phone call. I'm going to do a whole background on somebody. I'm going to move to the area. I'm going to go start drinking beer with a lot of folks. I'm going to do a whole bunch of different things to get in close with whoever my particular target is so that I can just milk them all day long. I mean, hey, here's the thing. If I can get my target to hire me, winner, chicken dinner, I can get paid money to do what I'm already getting paid money for. That is awesome, right? But anyways, in order to do human intelligence, you need information. So basically one of the things that I did, so this is GitHub. So basically I literally plugged into Google. All I plugged into Google was GitHub, and I work for Microsoft. If I want to try to compromise Microsoft stuff, whatever it is. And so Robert Holt comes up. I'm a project maintainer of PowerShell extension, all of this type of different information here. And so again, depending on what I am trying to go after as an attacker, this might be very valuable. Might be a good person to suck up to. Try to throw some code in there. Again, a lot of people are using GitHub now. Oh my golly, this whole GitHub thing, I don't know. Either GitHub is awesome or it's horrible. I don't know. But anyways, a lot of people are sharing code on GitHub. Again, one person does a project, another person forks a project. Here's my question. Do you think every coder that grabs stuff off of GitHub actually audits everything that's in the code? So if I can get on with a project and I can get in there and I can add some additional stuff to a project, that's great. If I can get you as a sysadmin or as the coder to install my malicious crap onto your systems, that's great. Actually today, Ars Technica, they had an article about Python modules. Apparently 30,000 people have installed compromised Python modules. So you install a Python module onto a developer computer, and once you do, it does whatever it does, and it starts harvesting credit card information and all that kind of stuff. Again, I don't know why. People trust folks, right? But again, so this is here. Again, this whole CTO in Asheville. So again, let's say I want to try to compromise technology systems or companies wherever I am. I just plugged in CTO in Asheville. Keith Edenfield popped up. Here's a whole bunch of different information about the person, and that gives me a lovely starting place to try to go after that particular person if they offer something that I'm actually interested in. And to be clear, for anybody at YouTube, before you kill my YouTube channel, this is all publicly available. I was not logged into it. I actually used Google Chrome. I was not logged into anything, not logged into my LinkedIn, not logged into GitHub, and I literally just Googled, and this information came up. So again, imagine if I was actually a malicious actor and I really wanted to spend a week researching my targets and really figuring out who I want to go after. Does this seem smart? Again, thug with glots. Look at that dumbass. Geek, spelling out exactly what they do. Oh, well, that's professional. Be careful. If you're doing a business, one of the things I would say is take a look at cybersecurity insurance. So a lot of times when people think about insurance for their business or their organization, they think about general liability insurance. So general liability insurance is I am repairing my client's computer, I trip, I drop the computer on the ground and it breaks. General liability insurance replaces that computer. There's a lot of other insurance out there. Errors and omissions insurance. If you're a consultant, you should get errors and omissions insurance. So if I do not tell the customer or the client something that I should have told the customer or the client, or I screw up a configuration, I did not physically break a device, I just screwed up a configuration, errors and omissions insurance will cover that problem. There's cybersecurity insurance out there. So this is just from the Hartford. I just did a screen grab, go out there, probably whatever insurance company you're using has something like this, and they'll deal with. To protect against those risks, add cyber insurance to their business. Cyber insurance can offer broad coverages to help protect businesses from various technology-related risks, blah, 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 cyber liability, and data breach insurance. So depending on what your company is, you go there, you find the appropriate insurance, you pay a few dollars a month. Honestly, it's a gold mine for these insurance. Let's be clear. Let's be crystal clear when I say this. This is basically a gold mine for the insurance companies. They charge you $40, $50 a month or $500 a month, and basically they never have to pay out for the most part. But every once in a while, when something really bad happens, they do pay out. And so that's what you're paying for. You're paying for insurance. You really are. You are paying for if something really horrible happens, your company doesn't get bankrupted. And then the final thing is, again, as I would say, with all this, with cybersecurity, distrust, verify, stay suspicious. One of the saddest things, one of the weirdest things about the modern world is that, again, there is this idea that we're all at loggerheads. There's this idea that nobody likes anybody anymore, and that we're all like anti each other. I would argue the real problem is we're too nice. Again, the difference between what the mainstream media tells you and what reality is, what I find in the real world, is that people are way too damn nice. They're way too compliant. They're way too helpful. And so if you have a nefarious actor that realizes that's how people really are, they can come in and spin a story with very little effort, and it's amazing, what they can get away with. Again, when we start talking about the VPN service, this idea of magical stuff. Again, whether it's SolarWinds, whether it's VPN, whether there's anything else, there's this idea, Eli, I bought this thing, and now we're magically protected. It's not how it works, not how technology works. This came from Ars Technica, 7/26/2021, so for my time period, just came out a couple of days ago. VPN servers seized by Ukrainian authorities weren't encrypted. Privacy tool seller Windscribe said it failed to encrypt company VPN servers that were recently confiscated by authorities in Ukraine, a lapse that made it possible for the authorities to impersonate Windscribe servers and capture and decrypt traffic passing through them. So, we will just leave you with that as a final thought. Distrust, verify, stay suspicious. If you cannot audit, if you don't have transparency into systems, you do not know what is actually occurring. That is why you need to have multiple layers of cybersecurity so that even if one layer fails, other layers will be able to pick up the load from that failure, and you will not have something be catastrophic. So there you go. Introduction to cybersecurity in a nutshell. Final notes on this. I realized as I was doing this class, this should be at least an 8-hour class. I think one of the problems that I'm having right now is doing these 2-hour classes. There's a lot of subject areas that just need a lot more time. Again, hacking needs 8 hours. Cybersecurity needs 8 hours. Interestingly enough, Azure Cognitive Services, 45 minutes is about good. But a lot of these subjects need a whole day. That's one of the nice things. So I will be moving over to the new office. The new office is twice the size of this one. So we're going to start doing full entire, Saturday classes, full day classes. And I think that will be useful for a lot of these subjects. Because one of the problems you run into is, like for me doing this, you just get jammed up, right? You do like an introduction to cybersecurity, and then you realize how much there is to say. This was 43 slides. I would probably easily do 3 times as many. There's just so, as an introduction, I'm not even talking about the complicated stuff. I'm not even talking about sitting down at a command prompt and actually starting to do anything. Just talking about the basics of what's going on. There's so much to talk about. So, again, if you're going to be doing this stuff wherever you are, basically create your own version of Silicon Dojo, there's just something to be thinking about. There are topics that fit well into an hour and a half and 2 hours, and topics that don't. Some of these topics don't, so just something to consider. That's about it. If you do want to support Silicon Dojo, again, we are free to the end user. That does not mean I don't have bills. I have rent now to pay. I have rent over there to pay. I have insurance. I do have insurance for this company. All of that has to get paid. This is not a free endeavor, right? The idea is that we separate out the payment from the actual education. Everybody is able, authorityless, gatekeeperless education. Anybody who wants to get educated is able to get educated. And that is what I want for our physical facility too. I want anybody to be able to walk in as long as they play nice, and that's about the only rule, right? Don't screw with anybody else in the class. You are able to learn. So I want to separate out the education from the actual payment. There's a lot of good people out there that are just happen to be really crappy, balancing their checkbook. And why should they not be educated? But in order to make that happen, I do need funding from somewhere. We get a lot of our funding from crowdfunding. So there's a link down below. Now, depending on where you're watching, there's a link somewhere over to DonorBox or whatever we're currently using for crowdfunding. If you would drop some money into that account, that'll be highly useful for us, especially if you're willing to do a monthly thing. Again, $2 or $3 per month. If we have a number of people doing that, it's pretty quickly we actually get up to a reasonable number, and I can do things like hire employees. As I say, with all these people out there that are demanding a $15 an hour minimum wage, great. I need to have enough money coming in to be able to pay that. It's kind of funny. It's kind of how economics works. Some folks don't seem to grasp that concept. In order to pay people $15 an hour, I have to have more than $15 an hour of revenue coming in. Funny how that is. So, if you actually do want to see this grow, if you want to see this become something a lot more special, again, just think about throwing in however much money you feel that this is worth. Beyond that, as always, I enjoy doing this particular class. Look forward to seeing you at the next one, and hopefully sometime here in Asheville, North Carolina.